live for another developer interview for our Perceptive podcast series. We are doing this just after Halloween. We are officially in, I guess, fall weather. The Halloween treats have been handed out, but we have one, I guess, last minute one with another indie interview. My guest is a returning one who is working on the kind of hybrid, kind of turn-based strategy meets RPG game Burden of Command. We're going to be chatting about that, as well as the challenges of trying to make a game that kind of splits between multiple genres. So please welcome back from Green Tree Games, Luke Hughes. How are you doing this post-Halloween day?
Well, it's a pleasure, but I'm slightly frustrated now because I felt that if I were a horror today, I would be justified if we'd interviewed yesterday. But now, no hope. The other thing I'm a little depressed about is my wife told me one of her friends, their anniversary is on Halloween. And now I just feel like, hey, how did we miss such a cool time to have anniversary? But I'm trying to handle these crises.
But it's great to chat with you again. For people watching this live or recorded, we spoke with Luke. I think it's been like 2, maybe 3 years. Again, it seems like time means nothing these days.
Absolutely not. It's been almost no time since we developed this game.
But it's great to have you back on. We have certainly a lot to chat about. So, first of all, I guess as a brief recap, for anyone new watching who missed our previous interview who doesn't know what Burden of Command is, what is kind of the elevator pitch for the game?
Well, my career was in Silicon Valley, so I was trained to do elevator pitches. So I'm proud of the fact I can do Burden of Command in one word. That word is leadership. Now, if you push me and you want 2 words, leadership RPG. If you want a phrase, guide a infantry company through World War II from the beaches of Morocco to Hitler's Eagle Nest. If you want to put it sort of colloquially, think of it as Interactive Band of Brothers, as some people have called us.
Nice. And I know you have been working on this game for quite a long time, and I know from our previous interview, a major aspect of it is kind of the real-world historical accuracy that you're trying to put into it.
That's right. Well, our guiding, and I'll mention Band of Brothers because I think it speaks to sort of the way we think of the world. So I remember somebody asking, I think Tom Hanks or one of the executives, why did you bother with these exact helmets for, the German paratroopers? Nobody will notice generally. He said, well, we just felt it was respectful and the right thing to do. So we wanted to tell a genuine story of the human side of combat, following a real regiment. We have a consulting historian, John McManus, who is there. Consulting historian, he's quite a well-known military historian. He read all our fiction and so forth, and he guided us, as did his books. We have a lot of vets on the team. We were lucky to get a lot of volunteers because they think we're trying to say things that haven't typically been said about combat experience. Honestly, if you digress for sort of explaining Burden compared to other games. If you take a first-person shooter, any one of the famous ones, visually and emotionally, I would say they're incredible. You feel like you're on the beach, right, at D-Day. You can't get better. But then you're running up the beach, you're doing quite well, you die, and 20 seconds later you respawn. Now, credibility is broken, right? It's now a game. The other thing is, of course, if you look at them, they're power trips, in my opinion. I'm not saying they're not great games, by the way. But you're running around, slaughtering everybody. You might need a little help, but pretty much you'll take care of D-Day. So we, on the other hand, wanted to paint that war brings out the best and worst in people. War is grim. Often you're sending people to their deaths. Maybe you're sending them their death and it wasn't effective. So we really wanted to, in sort of spirit of Disco Elysium, cover, or This War of Mine, the real emotional side of war, the moral side of war. And so we did, the situations we put people through are based very heavily on real situations, often directly, where we can, with the Cotton Balers. That's the regiment we follow. And otherwise, by analogy, we know things that happen and we do something in the spirit of those. We did 1,500 historical photos we colorized and re-edited. All of them are footnoted, which was kind of a bizarre idea for a game. Now, before you decide this is, somebody called it in a positive way, a World War II history book come alive, well, we hope it's that. But it's also, a tactical game. We tried to be inspired by things like XCOM, by classical role-playing games. You have a party of characters. Your party of characters is you as the captain and your lieutenants leading your squads. So it is about 4 or 5, just like your. I did a lot of D&D in my youth. Still run campaigns. It's your party, but it's a party of officers, and we want to be credible. So emotionally credible, morally in a sense credible, historically credible, follow a real regiment, and then we hope tactically credible. That which leads to a lot of problems, by the way. All these things lead to a lot of problems. That it's tactically points at what the combat was like. Of course, it's not the combat, but maybe more than in some ways in other games do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up XCOM because I'm replaying like some of the XCOM like mega mods for it now, or for this whole year. It's been again interesting to go back to like that XCOM style, and it's very challenging. I guess like this is like a good like first question for you in terms of balancing, I guess, the game with the accuracy. That I know is something that we brought up on our last chat, but it's still a very interesting. It's a very hard thing to work around.
Yeah.
Because obviously, like you mentioned, of course, games like Medal of Honor, Battlefield. Like you can have games set in a historical period. They can be completely historically inaccurate. You can have, a character like if you've, we all seen like the Battlefield memes. So someone jumps out of the airplane, shoots a grenade launcher at a tank, lands back in the plane, which I'm sure obviously happened in World War II.
What? Oh my God! We've got to take that scene out.
So,
go ahead. Finish your question.
So the question itself is trying to balance the fact that you're trying to make a game. You're trying to make something that's going to be entertaining to a strategy fan, an RPG fan, with the fact that you also want it to be realistic. And again, like realism in games can mean very different things. We've all gone as far back as like the Oregon Trail, or even stuff like something like Arma, or like that level of hyper realism. So for Burden of Command, like how do you kind of like square that circle between wanting to be historically accurate, and again, as you said, trying to show some reverence and respect for the period, but still trying to make something that can be appealing to someone to play?
Oh, yeah, I can say this has been a central problem of design, and I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, we did everything perfectly and so forth. I'm going to talk about the problems, because I think that's interesting for all of us. In indie, we share experiences. My marketing business ambition was to do a World War II tactical game that would reach XCOMers, that would reach strategy gamers. I haven't said war gamers yet. Of course, we'd like to reach war gamers, but I was consciously and deliberately from the get-go trying not to be a war game and to reach a larger audience, to be a leadership RPG, to draw heavily from XCOM. And I would say, honestly, I hoped it would be XCOM World War II when we started. In fact, Task and Purpose, which is a well-known military periodical, characterized us as that. And I think that was the design hope. It's not. And that's the reality now. And it's not because of the learning curve, and the learning curve is there because of our antithetical ambitions around accuracy, if I were to say that. So let me talk about this for a moment, because I think it's been a hard learning curve, and over the last year we've become clear about it. So I'm going to give you a concrete example. It's the easiest way to start. So if I were to do XCOM World War II, and there are some XCOM World War IIs out there, quite nice ones, and credible in different ways, First, I would do bang, 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 you're dead, which is what XCOM does. What do I mean by that? You shoot at the enemy, and they die. Now, I challenge you to think of many games where that isn't true. Even in sort of hardcore World War II tactical board games and so forth, from which we do some inspirations, they have things like morale checks and so forth. But really, often it's keep firing at the damn thing, pump together as much fire as you can, and eventually they break, which means basically they die. So we, on the other hand, my father was a historian, and so it's very important to me to be credible. I was a psychology and physiology. Since I'm trying to credentialize myself, I was a doctorate in those kind of things and AI. So I take getting it right seriously. And I was a director of research for Accenture. To me, it's very, very important to be accurate within limits. So therefore, I studied, from my research background, what the hell was combat like in World War II? Well, combat in World War II was not like I just described. For example, real GIs were shocked when they got on the battlefield and they didn't see the enemy while they were being shot at because the enemy didn't want to be seen. So instant problem. Secondly, Josh, I'm going to do a little game simulation with you right now. You are on the other side of the field. I have a rifle and I'm going to shoot at you.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do?
Probably get behind cover, duck.
Exactly. You're seen, right? Mm-hmm. Oh no, shoot me. I want to die for your game trip. So now, when you get down behind a stone wall, it's hard to put a bullet through you. Mm-hmm. But you maybe not be firing at me. I put enough fire on you. You're countering, if I'm lucky. That's called suppression. Yep. And in World War II, it was something like 40,000 bullets before you got a casualty, which is not a death. It's a wound. Now, artillery is tricky. Those of you who are knowledgeable in World War II know I'm simplifying. But generally, it was hard. In fact, in Afghanistan, in recent times, it's 70 to 80,000 bullets before a casualty because they ambush you and then they get the hell out of Dodge. So I studied that. I studied a book called Brains and Bullets, now called War Games. The guy who wrote that is a consultant to us now. And the reality of that was he said, look, it's really what's called the 4Fs. And there's a Brothers in Arms first-person shooter, by the way, which does try to do the 4Fs and got a lot of credit for that. The 4Fs I'll explain in a moment. And in fact, their executive producer, Colonel John Antle, is an advisor to us too. What's the 4Fs? It's find the enemy. Remember I said they don't want to be found. Mm-hmm. Fix the enemy. Fancy word for bang, bang, bang. Scare them. Make them sit down so they don't shoot at you. Flank them. Because, why run across the field in front of their rifles? Dumb. And then finish them. So we tried to recreate the 4Fs, which we do. You don't get, by and large, to kill enemies by shooting at them. You get to suppress them. Occasionally you'll get casualties, but it'd be a long time you just sit there and bang, bang, bang. And I'm going to get to the game design point in a moment here because it's going to be quite interesting, I think. So what you have to do is you have to get them suppressed. Then if you cross and assault them, they'll probably do what they did historically, surrender or run away. We make it more surrender because it just makes the game more efficient it might be more realistic, but we want to keep it a game. You get rid of a unit, but you have to do it the proper way. And people don't want a bayonet in the stomach. So therefore, when you're there about to put a bayonet in the stomach, they think twice and they run or they surrender. Unless you didn't suppress them, then you might get ugly. So this is all grand. 4Fs. I'm feeling very proud of myself. And now I'm going to get into the problems. Doing it right. Oh my God. Trying to teach people the 4Fs. It's not so much the 4Fs. It's trying to overcome their unconscious game assumption that bang, bang, bang will kill the unit. We've probably had about 150 to 200 playtesters come through. We've run 50 to 100 live playtests. I don't know. We've done surveys. We've done all kinds of stuff. And it's insane how hard it is to teach this because when it's in your brain, it becomes like a reflex. I've been playing games for decades where you shoot to kill. Shoot to kill, right? And let me put it this way. So first we wrote this gets to your point about tutorial boot camp, right? Did we sit down and say, my God, I really want a long boot camp because people love tutorials. No, of course. We wanted a small, tight one. Play right away. But things like this made us work very hard and longer than people might like, they think, to learn these concepts. So first, we gave them some text in the original version. Hey, look, it's the 4Fs. You got to suppress. So we tried it. You just read that. You get it, right? We explained it. No. They sit there. We watch them. They sit there and they shoot and they shoot and they shoot and the enemy doesn't die, and they shoot. And you're like, well, maybe I'll try some machine guns. Well, maybe I'll try some rifle squads. Maybe I'll try the mortar. And they just get frustrated because their brain isn't ready to acknowledge this bizarre, stupid game who isn't doing it the way they've been trained for decades. So then we started, it's almost like a parody. It's not because people are stupid. This is just human nature, right? They're trained. They've internalized it. So then we started pop-ups. Oh, you've got this guy pretty cowering. Maybe you should assault. Didn't work. Now, when I say didn't work, I should say every time we did an intervention, another percentage of people shifted. But it was shocking how many people didn't still. So then we started doing things like, you watch it and if you play the tutorials, the troops will start doing little barks. Sir, they seem to be cowering. Maybe we should assault. Helped another little bit. We did diagram, pictures, because here's the other thing that's so hard. People learn in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. Some people learn through text. Some people learn through diagrams. And we had people come in and they'd only look at the pictures. Then we had people come in and they'd only read the text. We had another person who's pretty famous out there as a podcast dude, and he says he'll only read manuals. Not the majority anymore. We have people who say videos. Now, we get some hate. We get mostly like for our videos. We get some hate from people for having videos. Right? Why do I have to go through this video? Why do they have to go through this video? Because we learned, right? The final thing that worked the best, honestly, and kind of put us over the hump was the videos. Because videos carry so much information in them. You get to watch somebody, you see what's happening, you see how it's going. So at that point, suddenly we saw, because we watched churn, how many of our playtesters left, right away from frustration and so forth, or in a live. Mm-hmm. The churn curve changed. And so that's why we do these videos. That's why we've had some complaints. By the way, I want to emphasize, generally, that you can go look at random people showing the game and the boot camps. It's generally positive. But there's a decent minority that is upset about something. One of the complaints we get is, Jesus, why are you telling me this 6 ways from Sunday? The reason we're telling you this 6 ways from Sunday, we were beaten over the head 6 ways from Sunday to learn we had to. Now, brilliantly, if we were geniuses and had a huge budget and 6,000 people, we could detect what kind of gamer you are, maybe. And we could make it just your style. For instance, there's a decent percentage of people who like to learn by trial and error. That is a very legitimate way to learn. I have no critique of it. On the other hand, as a small indie, we can't support that easily. So we just put you on the field and you do whatever the hell. We can't think of all the whatever the hells you do. And then you're wandering around like, what am I supposed to be doing? Mm-hmm. The companies, they go in, I've studied this stuff. They go in and they cover every damn thing you can do, right? We can't do that. So we have to tell you, do this, do that, and then we have to teach as best we can. So, summary. One example. We wanted to be authentic about the 4 Fs. It killed us in terms of the learning curve with people, but I'm not ready to surrender it. Now, last thing I say, I know I've gone a long time, but this is really an important illustration. Why don't I give up on it? Am I just a geek? I just want to, what the hell? I really want to make it realistic. The reason I don't give up on it is because why are people playing the damn game? Mm-hmm. Probably the majority want to imagine they're Captain Winners and Band of Brothers, or think, could I be? Mm-hmm. Could I have done it? So a large percentage of the people we've come in our playtests are called immersion people. They're mastery tactics people, but there's also immersion. They want to pretend they really are such a commander. They're willing to make decisions that may lose them the scenario to be what they think they would have been, maybe protect the men. And so if we compromise on fundamentals, then we are fundamentally failing them for what they came for. So that's why we stick to that. And if you want, if I haven't bored you to death already, I can give you one more interesting example of a learning curve problem like this, which made it not XCOM in World War II.
Sure.
All right. Was that a yes? You want to hear another one? Mm-hmm. All right. So this is an interesting one. Second one that gave people a fair amount of trouble was credible command and control. So what does that mean? in World War, if you might have noticed in militaries, they're very structured. They have things called squads, which are about 12 guys, 10 to 12 guys, headed by maybe a sergeant or corporal or something, depends. Those squads are grouped into platoons that are led by maybe a lieutenant. The 3 platoons are led by a captain in a company. We let you run a company. It's about 100 guys, 130 depending. We made another decision to make it a credible command and control to represent platoons and to represent the company. The irony is, it was not from one of the geeky scenario designers who tended to come from a more wargamey background. It came from one of our writers who said it's really important to give the platoons personality, to give the player a sense that if they're in charge of first platoon, that means something, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than second platoon. And if you look at some of the tactical games out there, they punt on this, some of them. What they do is say, oh, you're a little lieutenant here. Anybody in range, you're in charge of. As opposed to only the people in your platoon are you in charge of. So I sometimes maybe regret that I listened to the writer. It's wonderfully ironic that I listened to a writer rather than a military dude on this one. And it was brutal teaching people this structure and communicating to them, here are the units in your platoon, as opposed to the other ones. Teaching these are the only ones you can control right now. Mm-hmm. Frustrating for people. You know this. You've done a gazillion game design things. The moment you take control away from people, you introduce frustration. For instance, if you shoot and it doesn't kill, frustration. If you order them to assault and they fail the morale check, frustration. I'm going to destroy my desk side here for a moment. Here's a picture I keep up from my psychology background. This is a small baby with a, what do you call it? It's not a diorama.
Orbital.
Yeah. Over it. Why do I have this up? Because babies who give chance to control the world develop well. Babies you don't get control over, crying, frustrated, withdrawn. So every time you do something like, we're giving you credible platoons. You don't get to control every unit in a battlefield. Potential frustration, right? Why can't I? What's going on? I clicked on the unit. Why can't I move it? So we committed to credible command and control. It was very tricky to communicate. I would say that was the hardest interface element of the game. I went through, 7 to 10 versions of displaying to you which of your units you're under control now, who's in charge for this, what we call lead around. Oh, this lieutenant's in charge, this lieutenant's active, this platoon is active, the other ones aren't. We got there, but we got there by endless iterations with playtesters and plenty of humbling feedback on how my brilliant interface designs were wrong. We got there, but it's still not trivial. It's not XCOM World War II, click any of your units, shoot, right? It's credible. And the other thing is we alternate, right? You get to do a platoon, and then the enemy gets to do it. And then you get to do another platoon. You can't do all your units at once. Why are we doing that? Because the enemy gets a vote. And let me put it in game terms. It's an attempt to make it sort of pseudo real time. While you move your units, the enemy moves his. In other words, you get to move some, he gets to move some. You get to move some. This is actually pretty popular in some genres of board games, but it's not very common in digital games. So, not what people are used to. So the learning curves. Bang, 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 you're dead. Versus 4Fs. Credible command and control. This sort of back and forth in terms of enemy gets a move, you get it. And then I won't go on, but it's kind of interesting unless you want. Like there's a captain, he can intervene and glue the platoons together. We got through every one of these successfully, and then I'm going to qualify that. Meaning, by and large, the boot camp succeeds in teaching people these concepts successfully if they are willing to invest the effort. Now, that's not a critique of the people, because a good learning style is run around. It's actually, there's a formal term for it from Quandary Foundry that studies gamers, creatives. Creatives love to run around and break the game and mess around to really understand how it works. That's a great learning style. I go back to, I'm not critiquing people, but you must be methodical game learner to learn burden. And so a brutal, painful, humbling experience over this year for us was coming to this concrete realization that our market is methodical strategy gamers, people who are willing to learn Hearts of Iron 4, or some more of the maybe the original XCOM, probably a little better analogy, or other Battle Brothers, maybe, right? That's a pretty complicated game, actually. Somewhat hardcore in terms of new concepts. We work pretty hard making the interface XCOM-like and friendly, but they're new concepts or assumption violations. And so the casual gamers, or the ones who just want to mess around, they're frustrated, and they will remain frustrated. And if you're one of those people listening today, this is probably not your game. On the other hand, if you want a credible RPG experience of being a company commander and the burden that carries, the vets tell us we did a pretty damn good job. And I'll close on a credential on that. We have a guy out there who's a decently big streamer, 171,000 people, controlled pairs. He's a former U.S. Army Ranger. He's been very interested in what we did. He played it, and he put this publicly out on Twitter, so I'm not making this up. He said he thinks we nailed the experience in terms of boot camp. So people are frustrated with the boot camp. He thinks we nailed it. So, guess what? Boot camp might not always be fun. For instance, I can't resist one cute other thing. We have a jerk of an umpire. He's judging you, and he's mean. I'll give you one example that frustrated people, but it taught them. Mm-hmm. So this is a spoiler. So that we're going to say, oh, by the way, you can do waypoints, so you can move around. So if you want to go through terrain and not, go out in the open, it's dangerous, then you can use that. Okay, now, anyway, just, some more teaching. Jesus, they're teaching something. Okay, by the way, go run over to that hex. So then it's a direct line. So 9 out of 10 players run directly there, across the open. Mm-hmm. Up comes interactive fiction. Jerk, umpire. Hey, you're dead. Writing on sketchboard, you failed here. You ran across the open. They would kill you. In fact, that is where you really do get cut down in the game. You run around the open, you'll get cut down. So then people are like, hey, that was jerky. You tricked me. Technically, we didn't. We really did tell you what you could do, but we didn't emphasize it, right? We didn't say, oh, make sure you waypoint. But very interesting. They don't forget that one. They learn to waypoint after that because, oh my God, I got called on it. They're right. So, but that's what they do in real boot camps because they'd much rather you dealt with a jerk and not die in a real battlefield.
So many points you just mentioned there, Luke, that I can certainly talk about. To go back to what we were first saying about trying to teach the player something like this, that again is one of the quintessential challenges when it comes to onboarding. Yes. The thing that you said, I kind of perked my ears up, was the idea that if the player does X and they expect X to happen, but the game says no, Y happens, you'll have people again throwing a fit, as I'm sure you are very well aware of. I'm sure for any developers watching. I keep getting compilation videos of streamers and YouTubers who play games and they rage and they talk, oh, this game is stupid. I threw the grenade, why didn't blow up the enemy? Or I shot him and why didn't I get my triple kill? It's the game's fault. And trying to and this is something I was thinking about just before we started our conversation. When you're trying to do something that is against the grain like that, it is very hard, I think, to onboard certain people. For me, I try to approach games almost like Chameleon, that, if I'm playing a shooter like Doom, versus if I'm playing a shooter trying to think of something that's more realistic that I've played, or even something that's completely different, for example. Yeah, I will do my best to adhere to that. Again, if you play a strategy game, anyone who's played a strategy game knows that it's completely different universes. Yes, you can master Europa Universalis. That's not going to help you immediately turn around and say, oh, now I can play Stellaris or Hearts of Iron. But the problem and the challenge of all this is, what is the person's foundational knowledge? Because again, you're talking to someone who's played tons and tons of games. I have seen so much onboarding, I've seen so much tutorials, but I am not a war gamer. I have, the whole Paradox Interactive, that is a completely different universe for me. So, how do you onboard someone like that? And then conversely, you have someone who has played every single Paradox game, who's played Steel Panthers, who's played every Forex style. They'll approach things differently. And as you're bringing like examples of different kinds of learning, again, like you'll have someone who will read over every single line of text.
Yeah, we do get people like that. We have people who wanted the online encyclopedia, and they go in and read every damn thing. And the people want the manual. I mean, the learning styles are so different.
Yep. And
may I speak to some things you said there, or you want to finish from some points?
Oh, no, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sitting here, oh my gosh, it's hard. Oh, it's so hard teaching. But because we're doing things so differently. Look, first, let me speak to the positive of it. We've got a decent amount of attention for a little indie. For instance, we were covered when our demo came out by a PC Gamer, which is incredibly hard to get covered by. We got coverage by PC Games In. In the early days, we got coverage by Task and Purpose, which is a big military periodic. We had the cover of Stars and Stripes, the U.S. military's newspaper. We got on Forbes, which brilliantly, we're really grateful, and called us, interactive band of brothers. So why were we getting so much coverage? Because the concept was fresh, I think, right? Which is leadership RPG. Most people perk up their ears because we'd all like to imagine we can be a leader, right? Most of us. So interesting, novel. So these things we do that are different are one of the reasons we got attention. So people are interested in us because we're different. But then here's my somewhat, not cynical, but slightly hard-nosed observation. People say they want fresh and new. But the evidence is mostly what people want is they want a variation on something that is familiar. So look at sequels. Watch movie sequels. Oh my God, if the movie dares to go too far off the formula, death, at least with a decent percentage of their followers, right? Games too. I mean, I'm sure you can think of many examples from all the things you cover of sequels who get slaughtered for, like, better be different enough, but not too much. So our problem, back to the problem side, the good news is we got a lot of attention. We had 500, 600 people volunteer to be playtesters after we put them through a nasty, fill in a 20 to 30 minute survey deliberately, because I didn't want random people showing up and weren't willing to make an effort. And still we had 500 to 600 people for a little indie say, I want to do the playtesting. We've had a lot of enthusiasm and support. But when they come into the reality, it's such a, I think this really is fair because they tell us this. It's such a different game. So about 4 months ago, I was thinking for marketing purposes, I asked the playtesters, what's this game closest to? It was really interesting. There was no agreement. So some people said kind of things like Battle Brothers. Some people said things like, role-playing games. Some people named things like Steel Panthers. Some people, named a little bit of like interactive fiction games like Disco Elysium and so forth, because we do that heavily, right? So, but the general consensus was there's nothing you can pin it down to being one game. Now, as an exception, I will say one of your buddies, Strategy Informer, I think did nail it pretty well as sort of this famous board game Squad Leader meets, which, by the way, inspired in part Darkest Dungeon. And people say it's like Darkest Dungeon, meets Band of Brothers. There's something to that, but that means very little to most people. So, they come in, they have one frame of experience, like you said, right? Maybe they played strategy game. What was very encouraging is we got a diverse group of playtesters. We got people, our minority is wargamers. Really interesting. Our minority. Maybe they're 25, 30%. The rest of it is actually a very large chunk of RPGers who are really here for the immersion, and then strategy XCOM gamers. And each of them, and again, I point to quandary there. People call it immersion. They want to immerse. They don't want to master their mastery. They want to beat the game. They don't care so much about being in the immersion. They're story people. Each of these groups has a different learning curve and a different problem in dealing with the game. And another reason we had to hit it from many different angles. So my point is, going back to, people want creativity, but not too much, really, right? And if I had wanted, my safe solution would have been, from a marketing standpoint, to stick to XCOM World War II and really stick to it. Meaning, bang, 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 you're dead. Do some interesting variations, but not too much. Sort of put it in some real. I don't want to demean that, because you could do a pretty interesting World War II history, follow commandos, or small units in World War II, and you could cover credible topics, and you could still do burden of command like emotional issues, but you wouldn't do credible tactical things. You wouldn't do command and control like we did. So in the end, because of our commitment to trying to be tactically credible and historically credible, and we hope emotionally credible, it made this game have a learning curve that if I were just trying to make a buck, I wouldn't do. But the last thing because I don't want to paint this, oh my God, it's really hard, so forth. Samstra Games, female strategy gamer, she did a YouTube on it. She called it hard but awesome but hard, or hard but awesome. So I think it's a good characterization. It's not hard like you have to learn 38,000 mechanics. People tell us it's not that many things to learn. It's just hard because it violates your assumption. But it's awesome for many people. There's a little video on our channel, what the playtesters say. What we find is there's a hardcore set within it that they say things like, I will never forget this game. I've never played a game like this. Which is right, because it's a weird game, right? Or, I will never forget the moments in this game. Like for me, there's some decisions where people die, and I've never forgotten them. And I sit here, and that was just in the fiction version. Mm-hmm. And I think, could I have done something different? And I come back to, no, I probably would have done what I did. And yet I still feel guilty. As you know, I'll just hit one last fun thing. One of the unusual things about games versus movies, you can't feel guilty in Band of Brothers because it's somebody else. You're watching. But a game can make you, like This War of Mine or Frostpunk, responsible for your decisions. You feel morally responsible. You feel guilty for your decision. We go to town on making you feel burdened, guilty, because that's the nature of war. And so that creates a very emotional, strong connection that people don't forget because they get very engaged. We worked really hard on how to get you emotionally bonded. We talked to a lot of experts and famous game designers like Chris Avalon on how to do that to bond you. And so when you've done things that get somebody killed, you really care about. It's hard. So these emotional things succeed, but it's not for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again,
creative sounds good, but isn't necessarily marketing brilliance.
Mm-hmm. And again, so many good points there, Luke, that I want to talk about. To the point about the sequels, and you can't break the line, you can't cross too far. It's something that I see not only with because I just finished my book on real-time strategy games, so it's something I've been thinking a lot about the adventure genre as well. That, as you said, there are people who, when you say strategy or shooter or dating sim, they immediately have that itemized list in their head of, okay, it has to do this, this.
That's right.
And if it only does this, this, and this, then the game lied to me. It's horrible. How dare they try to market it as that? And trying to get to bring this to our overall topic about that challenge when you're not making an easily defined game. It's very hard to kind of convince someone, when you're trying to make a game that's part A and part B, what if they're only here for the storytelling? If, let's say, they don't care at all about the strategy. They don't want to hear about boot camp. They don't want to hear about the 4Fs. Right. They want to manage, this team of people. And then conversely, you'll have someone who's I don't want to read this dialogue. Skip. Right. Person dead. Oh, well, skip.
Exactly. We get those people. Understandable. Wargamers especially that way. I mean, again, see, everything you just said we experience. Mm-hmm. Now, again, I don't want to paint this, it's so hard, so bad. It's just a complicated problem. Yep. Because on the other hand, we get We get a good percentage of people that a game about war wouldn't get normally. We get immersion players. We get story players. We get tactical gamers. We get general strategy. We get this weird chunk, which I didn't really anticipate, but should have. These military sim guys who would normally play real time or first person, but they see that we're doing something credible, and so they're engaged, like the controlled pairs. So we get all these weird groups, and with comes back to the business design problem. With any given chunk, we violate enough of their assumptions that we're not going to get the majority. But for each one of them, we'll get a percentage. So if you did our Venn diagram of these different market segments, we get a decent slice of each of them, and we would bring in squads of players, each representing a given type, immersion players, right, or wargamers and so forth, and each group had its problems, but we got to the point with every one of those groups we can succeed with a decent percentage of each of them, but not the majority. It's probably about 40% of each group typically. Some groups, there's some that will probably go higher than that. So it's good in that we reach a lot of markets, but it's very hard. For instance, in the YouTubers, we probably had our most success with people interested in history, people interested in strategy. It's very hard to reach RPGers because we look too alien. We have some exceptions, right? And then other people just assume it's a war game because, of course, we draw on some of the war game mechanics. But my analogy would be, you sort of made this early on. Oh, this Crusader Kings thing. Oh, that's just Europa Universalis in medieval ages. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of truth to that. But really, for most people, it's a historical role-playing game with your family, right? Mm-hmm. And so Burden of Command, oh, it's just a war game. I mean, it hurt us a little. It was unfortunate the PC gamer decided to say, oh, it's an interesting, unusual war game. There's truth to that. But the people that go through the experience, engaged by it, it's a leadership experience. It's an emotional experience. It's, in the end, leading not sprites and little things on the map, but people. So, I lost one point there. It was really interesting. I wanted to hit that you'd said. I guess I'll just summarize. It comes back to, this is it. This is a fun one. So you said, what set of assumptions, you use slightly different language, do people bring to the game from their background? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to geek out for a moment. So my background with cognitive science and emotional psychology, and then my professor is a guy called Roger Schenck, who is a very creative AI guy, but he's very interested in how the human mind worked. He used AI to understand how the human mind worked. And he said, this is going to bear on what you said, but give you some sort of science to it. People like to think they're reasoners, that they proceed logically to conclusions. Not at all. What they do is they bring out their most reasonable memory that matches it all, and they go with it. So, for instance, if you go into McDonald's, this is something he became famous for, as an analogy. How do you know what to do in McDonald's? Do you reason from first principles? I am in a food consumption court. I must acquire resources to purchase their food. No. You do whatever you remember from when your parents dragged you into McDonald's, so you got the toys, and you do something similar. But if somebody takes you into a fast food place where there's no menu up above to look at, you're freaked out. Wait, how does this work? What? Oh, there's things over here. Or you go in and they're no longer recently there are less and less paper menus, right? Wait, what do I do? Wait. Why are you telling me look at my phone? Is it deep reasoning? No, it's what's your experience to draw on, and you map it to that, and you make your best shot off that. So same with games. As you said, when you come in, you're drawing on the most matching game you can. Understand that game. And Burden's creative advantage and disadvantage is there's no one game that it maps to neatly, and therefore you have to be methodical and learn the concepts. They're quite learnable, but you have to learn. I'll make one last analogy just for fun. Back in the day, when D&D came along, I bet you money, though I can't prove it, people said, oh, D&D, that's just fantasy war chainmail, because it actually came out of a set of miniature rules for medieval battles called chainmail, and they sort of just stumbled their way to D&D. Oh, well, what if we had fantasy creatures fighting? Well, what if they had to go into Lord of the Rings, sort of a dungeon? And so It'd be a fundamental misunderstanding of Dungeons and Dragons to say it's, fantasy chainmail. But it started life as that, right? But it was so different and weird. Luckily, it was so free form, everybody could get into it, that it was hard to learn. So this has been our central advantage because we're novel and creative and leadership RPG, and that interests people in a market with, 30,000 games this year. But it's also hard. I will say, for example, there were 3,000 game demos in Steam Next Fest. I'm happy to say the statistics are that we were in the top 10%. So that means 2,700 other games we got more attention to. That's hard. Why did we get it? Because people get we're different. But then when you go in there, we get, we got mostly positive, but we also got, hate. Why do there have to be any boot camp? Why are you doing these damn videos? I hate videos. Because every person thinks what's in their brain is truth. That includes me, right? My experience, surely, why doesn't everybody think the way I think? Well, because they're not you. I'll give you an example. I don't give a damn about game achievements, but never interested me. But I know in principle and abstract, people care about that. There's a good chunk of people really care about that. But to me, it means nothing emotionally. On the other hand, there are people on the team, they care about it. And they surprised me, I'm happy to say, about 2 months ago with a surprise feature they'd done in the background. And we have achievements. We even have achievements in our demo, which is unusual. And we got a lot of credit. And we got a lot of positivity around our achievements. But to me, in my little brain, it doesn't matter. Because I'm me. You stupid designer, Luke Hughes. Why are you doing achievements? Because it wasn't me. It was somebody else in the team. Right? So people draw from their own minds as what is truth. And it's hard to be in other people's heads. And, I don't want to go off course too much. But look around at political discourse. I think everybody's pretty certain and confident that their one way to think is the right way. I am constantly shocked that everybody doesn't agree with me about everything. Obviously, they're kind of stupid. Can I be slightly crude for a moment? And I won't use too heavy curse words here.
Sure.
May I? All right. So a joke I really like in the spirit of this is anybody who drives faster than me is asshole, and everybody who drives slower than me is stupid. Which in my experience is absolutely right. And I think in everybody else's experience it's absolutely right. So, point is, we all come in with our conclusions as gamers, our experience of what we've played, and that tells us what truth is, but it's not truth for other people.
Yep. And again, some really good points there. And as you were describing kind of the player finding something different or original weird or hard to follow, it reminds me completely of when Demon Souls and Dark Souls first came onto the scene.
Yeah,
that
good analogy.
For people who don't remember, like Demon Souls when it first came out was heavily reamed by a lot of people. Critics are like, "This game is hard. Like, what? I can't just run around and just swing my sword. I have to manage the corridor. If I swing it too far, it hits the wall. Or why does the tutorial boss just one shot me?" And it got reamed by a lot of people. Famously, Sony, as the story goes, Sony decided not to publish it in North America because they didn't like that game. Wow. They didn't want to support, and it was up to Atlas USA to publish Demon Souls. And again, as the moral of the story, or what happened was Demon Souls blew up over here. It became one of the more shining examples of the PlayStation 3. It led to From Software getting published by Banco Namco, and we now have Dark Souls, we have Sekiro, Armored Core, the whole like it was the defining game from Software.
Yeah,
but
good analogy.
Here's the other point. All those people who then jumped onto Demon Souls and Dark Souls, and they were saying, "Oh, you have to play the game like this, yeah. You gotta play the game just like this, or it's gotta be this way." They got to Armored Core 6, and what happened? All those Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and Sekiro fans hit that wall. Baltreus, I think, was the name, and the helicopter from Armored Core 6, and they they completely turn. They became like the rabid mob of, what is wrong with this game? Why can't I just dodge these missiles? Or, why is this boss just like throwing infinite shots at me and nothing's working? And you had those people who are like, yeah, you just play like this way. And again, like Armored Core 6 for me, it clicked. Like, I think after like an hour of playing that game, I was just like, I know exactly how I'm going to play this game, and I played through it all the way through 3 times to get the true ending. But again, you'll have those people who they came on during Dark Souls or even Demon Souls era. Now you tell them that it's a different kind of action, and they're like, no, 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 it's wrong, it's wrong. Why is there none of this? Why does my character move like that? And it is that difficulty of when you kind of go against that grain. Because again, you'll have people, and I'm sure you have them as well, who this doesn't play like a war game, this doesn't play like a shooter. I'm in. Right. I am 100% in. I'm all for it. And then you'll have that person like, wait, so right. I can't, double air dash and crouch slide around my shooter? No, this isn't a shooter. And again, it's that difficult. I want to bring up onboarding, but I'm going to stop for a second and let you respond.
No, you're right. I mean, but I want to be clear. We're not critiquing people again. Yeah. I want to emphasize it. I mean, it's legitimate to think that roguelikes are a certain way because they are for you. That's truth for you. And for a certain population, right? That war games should be this way. That's truth for you. Then, a tactical World War II game should be a certain way. It's okay to have different viewpoints. It's just we all want to conclude that it's and I'm not exempting myself. We all want to conclude it's a universal truth when it's not our truth. And just for fun again, I'm just having fun with you, so I'll bring up an odd one. I've thought of this in years. I remember I was in college, and they had us read a Socratic dialogue. And he sat there, and I don't remember the details, but the gist of it was, hey, what is truth? And what they created was so brilliant. I just never run into it before was, well, there's some forms of truth that are pretty objective. Dog. Is that a dog? We can all mostly agree that's a dog. I'm sure everybody can be clever and make an exception. But basically, we can agree. On the other hand, Josh, if I say, hey, is it cold in the room? You say, it's cold. I say, well, no, it's not. It's not cold. I feel hot. Who's right? Both of us are right. That's subjective truth. It is true for me, it's hot or it's cold, right? And the same thing for the game. Oh, man, Burden of Command, it's so stupid. You can't shoot it right away and die. Oh, Burden of Command. Finally, they're doing the 4S, which I think is the way it went, right? Who's right there? Well, now I think there's some objective reality, so I will go a little bit on arguing what's true there. But the point is that we all presume that what is our inner truth is objective truth, mostly. And it's just not so. So I just hope that people will approach it for what it's trying to be, that it is consciously trying to be authentic to the emotional, historical, tactical experience within limits, while being a game. We never hit that one too much, but we work pretty hard to make it a game, not, we will compromise on the history and all the rest so that it's a good game. And we have gotten plenty of feedback it's a good game, that it's got deep mechanics and balance, which I'd be happy to talk about some design principles there, because I studied that a lot. It's fun. But it's a different game. And so, approach it that you put it one last way. It's a certain thesis on what it's like to lead in war. Doesn't mean it's the right thesis. It's a certain thesis on what it is, and it's informed. We work pretty hard on it. Doesn't make it right. Makes it our opinion, but it's an informed opinion. And so if you're interested in that, if you think, Band of Brothers, what was that like? And it's still a game, and it's trying to reach you in broad terms rather than be super geek fest of 400 mechanics, because we work pretty hard to make it decent on XCOM-like in various ways, then approach it with that mindset that I may not agree with what this game's doing, but there are reasons it's doing what it's doing. And one of the things that helped us was I decided to break the fourth wall with the videos, and I actually speak in the videos as a designer. And I say, look, here's why we did this. And that helped a lot, because before that we had mechanics like, what the hell? Why are you doing these leader rounds where I can't control my units? And then I said, like I said to you, the video comes and said, look, we're trying to get across. The enemy gets a vote too, right? And so once they got why they were doing this stupid, wrong, bizarre, strange thing, they became much more open to it. That being said, we got plenty of people like, God damn it, I don't want any videos. I just want to go mess around, learn it. Why are you putting videos? You're a bad person. Pretty much. So, and I would just say it's not the game for them. That's okay. It doesn't make them bad. Just make it not the game for them. And that's okay. Right? So.
And there's that, as you're saying there, about being able to look beyond like your own biases when it comes to anything that you're reviewing or critiquing. Like, that's something that I say a lot with a lot of my design talks, that it's rare to find someone who can say, I hate this game, but I still recommend it to people who like X, Y, and Z. And it's something that I really try to do a lot.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that when you're trying to like balance like these kinds of elements in the game in terms of trying to do something original, trying to do something that's like more tried and true. Again, as we've said, it's very hard, I think, for people, as we said, like when they have that kind of clash, that if I do X and Z happens instead, how do they behave accordingly? A game that I played this year that reminds you a lot of this is when I tried out Men of War 2. And that they're trying to do kind of like a very grounded, like more realistic, like Company of Heroes style, or RTS World War II. And it's a game that, again, like it is very tricky to learn. Now, I do want to talk a little bit more about onboarding in a minute, but part of that challenge is that it is a game that it doesn't play like any other RTS that you've played. Like, it's one of those games you have to manage everyone's inventory. You have to, again, know about proper cover and positioning and flanking. And it is a game that, again, like if you go into expecting, it looks just like Company of Heroes or Command & Conquer, you are going to get creamed in it. And I have a friend.
I love an example of that if you'd like. So this is one of the early ones, and it gets to the onboarding a little bit and the teaching. So, as like I said, majority not wargamers. So first we just had to learn a lot in the teaching. Like early on, we said, headquarters is calling. And we had a playtester say, what's a headquarters? What's an HQ? And then we realized, wow, we really are too close to this subject for the audience we're trying to reach. So, we work pretty hard in the kind of the teaching in the background. But another nice example. So we have an interesting spoiler of a bit, but you'll forget, so I don't mind. There's a scenario where there's pretty forested and there are a lot of roads, and so naturally you send you have some nice tanks, send your tanks down the roads, and you hit a tank mine, and your tank gets blown up. Boy, gamers were pissed, right? Like, hey, that's not fair. I couldn't do anything about it. I just got blown up. And we're sitting here thinking, you know what? The Germans didn't like playing fair. They wanted to kill you. And so they knew you would pick the road. So they put the mines on the road so they could kill you. And again, experience, right? Rather than nice. Let's make it a nice scenario that's very fair. Let's put you up against the Germans the way they would have done it. So how did we handle that, though? Because people were frustrated. Now, we could have said, shut up, you're stupid. Come on, World War II, read your books. Instead, we said, look, it's a pretty legitimate response if you have no background for it. And so that's when we use the role-playing. This is an advantage we have on the teaching. Because we're interactive fiction and narrative, and we can trigger events very dynamically in the engine. Sergeant Grant is kind of the voice of the man, kind of your experience, Sergeant pops up and he says something along these lines. Boy, that sucks, sir. That was just unfair, sir. I guess we're going to have to avoid the roads in future because I guess I just know we're coming down the roads. And so then people absorb it, right? Now they're interested. Oh, I guess that would have been true. And so now you've made them, the immersion, the authenticity, and they see why this thing happened, the unfair thing, and they start playing differently. I remember there's one playtester we had, he was a classic kind of XCOM guy, but he became a really good World War II commander. It was really interesting to watch. He got really smart. Vets look at a field and they see fields of fire. Like, oh, if I were the enemy, I'd be putting a machine gun on that hill to get that open area. And they look at the open field and they see death, whereas we see, oh, nice, easy to walk across. And you learn that as you play the game. So that was. Now we just don't have the resources to do it all the time, but that's the kind of thing we try to do, where we can identify it enough to teach, and it's very effective when we do it and very memorable. And people, it turns into positive. They sort of tell stories to each other, like, "Oh yeah, it's like those mines, man. I've sure learned to avoid roads." They're interested now because it feels like part of the experience. If I were to summarize, Burden's not trying to be fun. It's trying to be an engaging experience, which fun's close to. We try to be engaging, but we're trying to put you there in a way you're compelled, you're motivated, you're engaged. But if you're here to have your power trip, don't play Burden. One more for you. This is interesting too. So, I'm sitting here saying, oh, look at all these creative things we did. Oh, look how different we are. That was hard to get to. So I suffer from assumptions like everyone else. Though I have some research background. I go and, my research background says go read a lot of primary material before you form your own theories. Actually, just to digress for a moment. So something I was taught is reinvent the wheel. Now, 99 out of 100 people will tell you, you moron, go learn about how to make a wheel. Don't reinvent it. Wrong. If you want to be creative, don't go study how to make wheels, because you will make a wheel like every other goddamn person in the universe, because somebody bright wrote a manual on how to make a wheel. And so, of course, they're smart, articulate, and you've never thought about the topic, so you'll make the same wheel. But if you don't, and you go look at wheels from first principles, you might come to, spokes approach, or, not having solid wheel, like somebody in Samaria figured that out, right? So my point is, how am I trying to be creative? Two tricks I have. One is I just don't read the secondary material first. I read the primary material. I read a lot of autobiographies from captains and so forth. Other trick is I'll look at different weird fields. Like I'll go talk to psychology people, or, novelists. I'll read novels in the war, right? Or I'll go play some games on just to get different angles, because that's an easy, cheap trick to be creative. Bring something in from anthropology. Go read an anthropology. There's a great book out there, The World of War, which talks about what the soldiers thought of the war. As an example, their metaphor was World War II movies. They'd watched a lot of military movies in the 30s and into the 40s, so they expected it to look like World War II movies, which it didn't, right? Like I told you, you never saw the enemy, except maybe you were dead, and then only in heaven you saw the enemy shot you, right? So, my point is, I had a lot of unconscious assumptions, too. I remember the revelation on the 4S. I ran across this article by a guy who was training the Brits, and he said, look, you go out on the ranges and everybody points to all the shooting at the targets and how important it is to train accuracy. He says, yeah, but it ain't that way when people get shot at. So here's a stupid little silly thing. There's a wonderful 4-page article I can give anybody that wanted this. It was really opened my mind on the 4Fs and suppression. He says, all you do is just have some fake fire going on in the battlefield, right? Just shot, or I forget if it was some real fire, but not dangerous. And watch what happens. Instantly, everybody takes cover, and they don't want to stick their head up to get shot, so they're like going, and man, forget the accuracy on the target. It just becomes throwing bullets downfield. It does not shoot them dead outside of the super snipers. So that was a real wake-up call for me, on it. This was not going to be bang, bang, you're dead. Another one was most of the project development. We had one victory condition, like every other game in the universe, right? Win the mission, take the hill. Your condition today is to conquer these 3 places. We did that forever. But we kept thinking about what the hell is burden of command? And we decided the core, after a lot of talking to each other and to other people, was men versus mission. Are you going to get people killed to take that hill? That's how the essence of burden of command. Other variations of it. Are you going to get civilians killed to take the town? Are you going to slaughter helpless enemy like the highway of death in the Gulf War, right? Maybe you should, right? Because you don't want to fight the Iraqis again. But maybe you shouldn't, because it's just pointless slaughter at this point. There are many forms of the burden, but the core is your men versus a mission. And then finally it hit us, Let's put that into mechanics. So you have two victory conditions always in every scenario, men and mission. Because we were trying, oh my God, I wish I thought I'd put it this way earlier. Here's another crazy thing we tried to get people to do. We tried to get people to agree not to win the mission, not to win the scenario, to not take the hill. But every game known to man teaches you, oh, I remember playing Panzer General first time, right? Oh, campaign's over, dude. If you don't win that scenario, it's just over. In Burden of Command, you maybe you'll get kicked out. There's some interesting things happen, but we'll never kick you out of the game. Your captain might run into trouble. So you can fail the mission. Why, Josh, might you fail the mission? What would motivate you to fail the mission?
Oh, let's see. If there's enough penalty, to ruin your squad.
What if you're going to get your men slaughtered?
Yeah.
Right? That's what real leaders think about. And they never call it retreat, but they call it strategic withdrawal or withdrawal. I got schooled on that by vets. Do never call it a retreat. But they do it all the time. Right? So we sit here and say, hey, you're getting close to that hill, but your casualties are 10, 20%. If you go any further in casualties, you may lose the men victory condition. Now their gamer brain pokes up. Oh, I don't want to lose a victory condition. And so now maybe we can actually motivate them to not take the hill because they want to win with the men. But they might push on and they might lose both. Right? And then just from one more fun thing on the emotional narrative side. So suppose you're Mr. He-Man Patton, right? And you're going to take that hill every time. Damn the consequences and the cost. Mm-hmm. Well, we put you in some scenes where, the colonel calls you in and, man, he's so proud of you. You've done a great job. First, he may give you a harder mission as your reward. But secondly, you feel really good coming out of his tent. But then there are the men, and they're staring at you. And, and Grant kind of looks down, your sergeant, and you can feel he's very unhappy because you've got a lot of them killed. Now, inversely, what if you're a nice bleeding heart? You really take care, you really care, right? And then, the men love you. Well, at a point they might not, but within limits yeah, you saved us. You care about us. He's a good leader. Then you go into the colonel's tent. Oh, you don't want to be in the colonel's tent. We had a playtester go in. We put a fiction scene in that, and he'd been being really nice to the men, and then he had the colonel scene, and he came out really thinking harder about what he was going to do in future, all done through the narrative. The writers have gotten a lot of good feedback.
And again, so many really good points. It's reminding me of, I'm playing through one of the XCOM mods, Xpire, so it's kind of super, expanded XCOM, and I had one of the terror missions, and it's okay, I'm about to step out of my air vehicle. All of a sudden I hear 10 Gatling guns, 10 rocket launchers, and 5 tanks go. I'm okay, maybe we'll just skip this mission. Everyone get back on the bus. We're going to leave now. And it is very hard. And again, to kind of tie this all together, it's hard to train someone to go against their base instincts or their base knowledge. As we've said, you give someone who's played Doom an FPS, they're going to play the FPS like Doom. Just as someone who plays an RTS like Company of Heroes will play every RTS like that. And a point that you brought up earlier, I was just thinking about, is when you said, someone says, oh, the game is cheating. And I've seen, streamers and YouTubers, get in that mentality of, oh, the enemy's not perfectly responding because I did A, they're doing something else. It's the game's fault. I did it right. Why is the game, trying to break me? And I'm just saying, yeah, that's how a conflict works. That's how a fight works.
An interesting one on that. So this is one we've gotten, one of the areas, there's certain things we've gotten negative feedback on within percentages again. One of them is, it's essentially the XCOM, hey, this sucks, man. I had a 90% chance to kill it and I didn't kill it. Because statistics are hard for people, right? In fact, XCOM cheats, as you probably, many of you know, and they manipulate the statistics so that you feel they give you 98%, but they say it's 90%. Now, I feel weird about doing that for a credible game, so we don't cheat on the stats, which means people think it's very unfair sometimes. So on assaults, when you order green troops to do an assault, that's from the stuff I've read, Brains and Bullets, or what's called War Games Now, the book. One of the hardest things you can ask soldiers to do is assault, because that's asking them to run in the face of fire and maybe get a bayonet in the stomach. It ain't natural. And so it's somewhat hand wavy, but the statistics are if you just ask them to and you're not a particularly good leader, it's about 40 to 45% chance they'll do it. If you're a good leader, very trusted, maybe gets up to about 75% if everything's going well. So we do those statistics for green troops. Your experienced troops will do it. They'll run across the field, winners guys will follow them, late war and burden of command. But you may regret it because you'll get a lot of them cut down because they were so willing to follow you. Oh, in fact, you can pick like these mindsets, like Disco Elysium, we call one zeal. They'll follow you if you're zealous. You're Lieutenant Spears, for those who know the crazy guy who would run across the fields and Band of Brothers. You can be zealous, but you may get a lot of people killed while you're being so super cool, compel them. Anyway, so back to the boot camp. So it's about a 70% chance if you do everything right as a player, everything right, you bolster them, this is called. You have a good leader, the leader with them. They don't have any suppression themselves. 30% of the time, they won't do the assault. And the chances mathematically that will happen twice is 10%, which is pretty high, right? So 10% of our audience twice in a row. In fact, I did a stream during Next Fest. It was happening to me. I was like, oh, God, this is frustrating. But, so people are understandably frustrated. Why? Remember the baby with the mobile? Loss of control. The game decided you would fail. You did everything wrong, right, and the game decided. So people are frustrated, but I couldn't convince myself to, well, maybe the second time. But really, the troops just denied your order or, sort of gave half-ass credit to it. They're going to do it the second time? I find it very hard to believe. So I was really sitting there, like, how can we do this? Because people are frustrated, understandably, a certain percentage. Now, if you focus on training your men up and, RPG and give them experience, you can get past this. We have some YouTubers who put out, look, focus on getting some of your squads really experienced, and then they'll pass these checks, and you can do really well, right? There's a learning curve. But it finally hit me. This is sort of a game design win. We don't have it out yet, but we will have it. So it struck me that if you were flanking the enemy, right, meaning you're on their side. They're looking that way, and you're on their side or behind them. They're going to be surprised when you assault, and they're not going to be ready to fire on you. And you know that reasonably, right? Surely if you know you're flanking them, you have a pretty good feeling this is going to work. And it struck me, maybe then your chance to pass a morale check would go up. Hey, I got these, jerks. I got them, man. They're going to die here. They're going to surrender. So I checked with our expert who wrote the Brains and Bullets book, and he agreed it was credible. It was a reasonable argument. And so we're going to do that, which turns out to be really nice. Meaning, if you do the 4 F's fully, you find, you fix, you flank, and you finish, the game will reward you. I'm pretty much going to make it like 100% if you've done all those properly, that you will get that morale check pass. And then, this is my sneaky evil game designer trick though, is now, if they don't do the flanking, because of course flanking takes extra effort, you have to sneak around, you might take extra turns, the scenario's running out, and you feel like you don't have time to flank, so you run across the field. But then the men like, oh yeah, you want me to run across the field and get killed? I don't think so, sir. I'll just sort of stumble and fall down behind this rock while we're going there. Then what you'll say to yourself as a gamer is, oh crap, I should have flanked. I knew I should have flanked. And I cut corners, and it's my fault I failed the 70%, rather than that stupid jerk Luke Hughes who made the 70% thing, right? So where we can find those kind of wins, where we can give back agency or control to the player, but not violate the authenticity, we're really keen to do that, because we don't want to frustrate players either, but we want to be credible.
Mm-hmm. John in chat was asking, what is a soldier morale check? If you could clarify.
Thank you, John. Perfect example. Unconscious assumption. I grew up playing a lot of board games that had that kind of thing. A morale check is basically you are asked to do something hard, and dice are rolled to see if you'll do it. So morale checks in Burden of Command are when you're ordered to assault. You say, assault, right? You right click on the enemy, and you say assault. And I look at your morale. The units are sort of rated When they're green, they're 1 to 10, depending how suppressed they are, 10 being good for a green unit. But experienced units might have, extra stars, they're 11 morale, they're 12 morale, and each of those is like 10% better chance to pass the test. So if you're like a, elite late war dude unit, you will always pass the assault morale check. But if you're green, and there's some subtleties here, but I'll skip them. Some greens might make some stupid decisions here in assault when they shouldn't. But let's just keep it simple. 70% chance. We roll the dice. And 30% of the time, something weird happens in the game. The unit doesn't do what you told it to do. Just like when you shoot in XCOM and the shot doesn't hit. Except this is really unusual, right? What? I clicked the goddamn enemy and I said assault. What's going on? Well, that's a morale check. Another example of morale check, and I did a fair amount of research to get the ones that are considered to be the credible. I'm not saying I'm right. I can support every one of these morale checks. There's an argument for them being legitimate. Another one is moving under fire. So we mark the hexes that you could take opportunity fire or reaction fire, or what's XCOM call it?
Overwatch.
Overwatch, right? You can take Overwatch. They're marked. If you try to move into one of those squares, your unit will take a lesser morale check, not like an assault. But it will make a morale check, and sometimes you just ask him to move across the open, not to an assault, and they'll refuse. So, by the way, the leadership role playing, John, is get your leader there. Bolster, which means motivate the men. Your odds will go up. Like on that one, you'll pretty much pass that if you bolster your men and they aren't suppressed, if they aren't freaked out by being shot at. So morale check to cross the open. Here's a really cool one, actually. There's something called weapon push, weapon pull, which is a very fancy term for scary monster shows up on the battlefield. What would be a scary monster in World War II? Tank. So the evidence is that if enemies showed up with weapons you don't have, a class of weapons like airplanes show up and you don't have any airplanes, or artillery, or machine gun, or tanks, people become pretty unhappy, meaning they take morale check. So if you're clever, you can use this in a game. If you're very clever when you reveal your tank, your Sherman or whatever, to the enemy, everybody in line of sight, the first time the Germans see you have a tank and they don't, will freak out, do a morale check, and some of them will surrender if they can't find any cover, and others will run. It's a pretty neat mechanic, actually. It's a little bit like Fields of Glory. There's a lot of morale. Fields of Glory is a nice Ancients game out there, pretty popular, and it has a lot of morale checks, and whole armies can break down and run. And there was some of that in World War II. Fun side story. So, late in the war, the British, was it the British? Yeah, I think so. They figured out that if they had a armored tank flamethrower, that's a pretty bad monster. It's basically a dragon. And we're joking around, but really think about the thing. The thing, I almost cursed pretty ugly there. It can really burn the crap out of you, right? That's a pretty ugly way to die. And so there were German paratroopers, for example, holed up, tough guys in a village, and they were not giving in. You're firing at them, they're undercover, they're just being suppressed, maybe some, but they're going to kill you if you come to get them. And the Brits are like, I don't want to do this. They paraded in front of the German paratroopers the flame tank, and they had it shoot fire out. And suddenly, white flags appeared all over the paratroopers. Do I really want to be burned to death for the Fuhrer? Right? So that's a pretty hard ask for anybody, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an example of the morale check. And there are a lot more cool ones you could do in this for this psychological battlefield. Like, what if your guys grab the hill you've been fighting for? Well, that'd probably give everybody a morale boost. We didn't get to do all the ones we'd like to, but if, Burden does well enough, I would love to make it more and more the psychological battlefield, of which, John, the morale checks are an illustration. But there's so much more that goes on when you lead real humans in battle. For instance, we have a berserk mechanic. If you develop certain mindsets, some of your units may go berserk. If you're a zealous leader, you so inspire them, they just lose it. And they run at the enemy. Which happened in war. This was not common, but certainly happened. And they'll pass all the morale checks getting the enemy unless they get cut down, right? Which they may, because they're running across the open, maybe against an enemy that hasn't been suppressed. So we wanted to paint a human side of war through the narrative, through the tactics, but this leads to things like, I ordered the unit to assault, and it don't.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Again, like so many really good examples. I love the one about like the monster on the field because it reminds me so much of my XCOM playthroughs I'm doing right now, where again you think you're all high and mighty until the enemy brings out plasma weapons or a
Remember
chrysalid
that? Yeah,
shows up.
that is brutal.
Yeah, or like in the one I'm playing now, they introduce energy shields. All of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute, why are my bullets going through this? Why are they just not getting hit? It's like, oh, okay, so now we're playing that
When
game.
World War One, when the first tanks appeared on the battlefield,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, the Germans just gave up and ran and so forth. But they were so unreliable that
Mm-hmm.
they weren't as effective as they could have been. But they were insane shock weapons. The first, I mean, who
Yeah,
was going to stand against this monster that you couldn't hurt? And at the beginning of World War II, tanks ran around, ran amok because there were very few weapons that could destroy them.
yeah,
So, there are monsters in the World War II battlefield. The MG-42 machine gun, which is a German machine gun, was a monster of a small sort.
yeah.
And the reports from the Allied troops were just, they hated going up against the MG-42. It had a very high rate of fire, had a lot of accuracy. There's a whole geeky thing you could do in that. But we might give the Germans, because they did have it, MG-42s in their squads. And they do nasty things like fire twice when your rifle squads fire once. Ugly. It's not fun going up against the
Yeah.
German units. But if that's what it was like historically, they were well trained and they had a very fearsome tactical weapon to deal with.
Yeah. And as you're describing like the different morale checks and kind of like psychology behind it, that was kind of like one of the things that I was thinking about like XCOM 2 and like going from XCOM 2 to some of the original, some of the mods I've seen. And one of the things that I always felt was kind of like hurting XCOM 2 in that respect was that it felt too, I guess, like too railroaded in a matter of speaking in terms of like how you're supposed to play that game. Like, it's not a game where the enemy's going to surrender. It's not a game where, if you do really well, the enemy will just, a sector will just go, nope, I don't want to fight you anymore. But the issue that I had with that is that it led to things being very repetitive. And that I think has always been like one of like the killers of some of these games. So I was thinking about this the other night with horror design. That there's that mentality that a game can be like ultra min max. That if I super duper optimize, that I
Yep.
will win every encounter, every enemy is easy, I will never have any struggle with this game. And like to me that's always been like the more boring or just like that kind of robs the excitement of that game. Was if I know that I'm supposed to play the game this, and this every single time, yes, I've learned the game, but there's no more game anymore. It's just a series of linear orders.
Well, we have people who are good that way. They're very smart mastery players. I lean a little bit that way myself. I used to play D&D just to, get the highest possible level. And then I remember running into a guy who, like, he played a drunk fighter and he just ran through the door while we were planning the perfect tactical strategy, and everything went to hell. And it was one of the most memorable experiences I ever had. And I started learning role play, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, wow, role play means something other than min max. So we get min maxers. We try to encourage them not to reload, not to scum save, and so forth, so that they learn like a real leader did. But of course, they're optimizers. I've had some really intelligent critiques of the boot camp, like, hey, it's unfair for a min maxer if you get some of those failed morale checks, because then you don't get the assault and you don't get all the wonderful experience the game gives you if you do a successful assault. And so I can't create the optimal company if I get unlucky with my morale checks. And it never occurred to me. Oh, that's true. Right. So, but at least we'll have the flanking. So, it's the psychological uncertainty of this game can certainly become the way you describe if you wanted to. It's amenable to getting real. You can get your leader so good and your squads get so good that you'll railroad most things. But we do mix up the nature of the scenarios. The narrative decisions constantly change. I mean, for instance, you do things like go into wartime Rome, or wartime Naples, and I don't want to do spoilers here too much. But wartime Naples was very complicated. There was U.S. Army had to make compromises with the mafia and so forth. Very interesting historically. Anyway, you don't have any preparation for that. You've min-maxed your your XP and your trust for your leaders and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to help you in the streets of Naples. So, the narratives is good for shaking up what to expect. And we have landings, naval landings. We have dense terrain forests. We have open fields of fighting. You fight people don't want to fight like the Vichy Italians, and people do want to fight like the Germans. They're fortified lines like the Maginot Line, not the Maginot Line, the German line at the end of World War II, the West Wall. I forget its term right now. I'm blanking out, getting a little tired. But a lot of different tactical ones. So even if you think you figured out how to do X, we hopefully give you a new situation. Oh, and one more fun thing I'll mention. If you want to, we can go into it. On the psychology side, hopefully it's keeping John's interest, is we also model combat fatigue, combat stress reaction, and PTSD, which are obviously very psychological issues. And that's fancy for people freak out on the battlefield. Um, people freak out on the battlefield, like you may remember in Band of Brothers, the guy who goes psychologically blind. He's not physically blind, but he goes psychologically blind. He can't see because he just can't handle it, right? It's too much. And so we don't want to oversell it, but we do model some of those things. I can go into that if you want. But again, humans on the battlefield doing things that are fundamentally upsetting to us as animals, which is, exposing ourselves to death.
Like, modeling this kind of stuff has always been very interesting to me. There's a greater topic. Again, we could be here for another 3 hours, like talking about like how much, I guess, like realism or how much you want to simulate different aspects of these kinds of approaches. Because again, like there are games where morale is just, hey, your guy shoots your bullets do 5 points more damage because your character is overly excited, or now they're weaker because they're depressed. And then there are games that really go like above and beyond. And it's always that challenging, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, of how do you present this to someone? Like, how do you make someone care that, hey, you, like with your assault example, hey, you want to assault this, but your morale's not high enough, so you can't do it. And again, you'll have someone who go, wait, I click do this, and the game says no, the game is broken. And obviously the game is not working right.
Well, again, it comes back to limiting ambitions around things, right? So, because you can go to town forever in simulation, you'll never come back if you're trying to simulate, right? Like, for instance, we have plenty of people rightly point out fatigue matters for morale, right? Lack of sleep. Lack of food, actually shelter, things if you've been exposed to the elements a long time. John McManus, our historian, tells us that affects morale. But we can model. How about supplies? You're running out of ammo for your weapons. It's probably a little bad for morale. But I kept coming back to I'm trying to reach this larger audience, sort of ex-commie like or strategy gamers who are willing to be somewhat methodical, and got to limit it, right? So I tried to shoot extra features in the head as much as I could. But the fiction is incredibly useful on this front. If we know, for example, when they landed in Morocco, the U.S. didn't know how to do its supplies and logistics, and so they were very supply deprived while they were moving towards Casablanca. But we don't model supplies, right? But the fiction can do it. So the writers just go and say, hey, Grant comes over and says, look, the ships are piled up. We don't have any supplies. The men don't have enough ammo, and you read all that, you make some decisions, but then you close it and go back to the battlefield, and all your men just took some suppression, right? Or stress, I forget what the writers do. But basically, you hit their morale through a fictional decision of what to do. So the writing can do anything. I mean, if we wanted to, right, we could have XCOM aliens land in the battlefield. We don't do that, but we could. So the fiction can do anything. Words are powerful. So we have great choice of game writers, Alan Geese and Wang. They have a very strong reputation in the choice of games area, and so they know how to play these kind of games. So they will tie the battlefield to the fiction, and then the battlefield will, trigger the fiction. So you go to certain hexes, or you achieve certain things. Fiction fires certain outcomes. So that gives us a lot of flexibility on modeling all kinds of things that were true about World War II without having one more mechanic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a cheat, a very nice cheat. Once you open up the fiction, it's very powerful this way.
Yeah.
But I was always trying to Burden has a learning curve because we made certain commitments, like I've said, like bang, 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 you're dead, like credible command and control. But I was consciously trying to resist as much as I could because I wanted to reach that larger audience. One more grognardy, that's sort of a term for the geeky, wargamey type thing to make it more realistic because I really wanted to reach a broader audience about what the nature of war is, like Band of Brothers did. So we still did more than we realized we were doing for the learning curve. But we did consciously sit there. I thought constantly about, these simplifications. Where could I simplify? How could I make it, easier? And we killed quite a few realistic features. Like early on, I'll give you one example. We had a mechanic, what was it called? What was it? I'm blanking now, but if you did, you could draw on it and I know. You know this rubric. If you punish people, they hate it, but if you reward them, they love it, right? So if you say, oh, you can't play this game for the next 5 hours, they hate you. On the other hand, if we're giving you a bonus to let you play a little bit longer, they love you, right? But, it really turns out the math be the same. So we had some things like that. I learned that lesson too. If you can reward people and not punish, I remember now, this is a neat one. So early on, I punished people who didn't keep their platoon units next to the leader, because that's what you should do in war, right? You don't want your platoon 6 miles away because you have to send a runner over there if the radio's not working to talk to them. So, oh, you're out of command radius. You're a bad person, player. I'm going to penalize, you maybe won't get to order that unit, or it'll cost more orders. And people hated that, right? As you can imagine. I was punishing them. Nobody likes that. Like parenting, I've learned, reward them much more than consequence them. So then we dropped any constraints. If you want your platoon to be spread all over the map, you're allowed to. But we incentivize them. Oh, you want to bolster your unit? You want to rally it so its morale is good? Well, you got to be next to it. They can't hear you across the map. So then if you want to play well, you will naturally keep your units with their leader. And so that worked well. But we get complaints. Hey, I could have my squad all the way across the map. Yes, you will, but it won't go very well for you. But we won't punish you overtly. You just find you can't play as well. So tricks like that, right? Not limiting how many features, rewarding people for play for the same outcome rather than punishing them for the same outcome.
Yep. And again, it's that kind of challenge that goes into, like what you said a few minutes ago about you can have someone do every single thing right, and if the game says they fail, they're throwing their computer out the window, or they're going to put a hole in their wall. And it's that kind of challenge of games like this, and going back to the original XCOM, of how do you kind of train the player to understand that you want to mitigate all the risks. You don't want to send, a bunch of people down an open field. You don't want in XCOM put 10 squaddies right next to each other so someone throws a grenade and blows them up.
Exactly.
But conversely, you also have that issue of, okay, let's say that player does do everything right. Let's say they did that perfect flank. Everyone's spread out. And every shot they take misses. The enemy still kills them all. People are going to be like, well, if I did wrong and I lose, and I did right and I lose, what was I supposed to do? And it's a very hard ask.
We can't overcome that for everyone. I'd say for the min-maxers, it's not chance, I think, that you see one form of games is very successful now. What's the one with a little grid where you're fighting little aliens and taking over your cities, killing your cities? It's very simple, and you know in advance what the enemy aliens will do. It was a very successful game about 4 or 5 years ago.
They were Billy.
Put in right now. But let me put it differently. Oh, I know, like the card game, my brain's just getting tired now, Slay the Spire.
Yeah.
You know in advance what the enemy will do, right? People love to play games where they know what's going to happen. Or the wonderful cool game that came out, the Wizards that are part of the...
Tactical Breach Wizards?
Yeah, thank you. Right, you know what the enemy's going to do. That's beautiful. Yeah. Not true in a World War II battlefield. So again, coming back to our credibility thing, people would like it if we did that for them, but it has nothing to do with what World War II was like. World War II is full of chaos. If you read any of the history, mostly it was not going according to anybody's plan. That's why snafu, situation normal, all fucked up. right, is a common term because that was normal, right?
Yeah.
So chaos is war, and we way underplay chaos compared to the real war, but we still hit it more than people are used to. So how do we get out of people being angry? Then Max, we probably can't, right? Unless, even with them sometimes, if we can cross over and say, look, you're getting that experience. You're experiencing what they experienced, the chaos, the morale checks, the combat fatigue, the moral quandaries. Then they say, oh, that sucked. My tank got blown up by that tank mine on the road. But that's what the Germans did, didn't they? That was the experience. So the RPG side allows us to persuade people. If we had a pure war game, for example, that had morale checks, and there are such games, right? And it was never explained, it's just frustrating. Oh, or explained, but it's just a mechanic. Oh, you do morale checks. Then people are like, well, screw this, man. I want to play a game where my good decisions are rewarded. But on the other hand, if we can reach them through the fiction, and sometimes maybe a little bit through my video persuasion, talking about the history like I'm trying to do today, and say, look, you wanted to feel what it was like to be a company commander in World War II or a lieutenant or a poor bastard on the field. That's what it was like. They didn't do what you said. I remember the opening of an autobiography. It's just a wonderful, some captain, U.S. captain, I'd have to go find the title. But the opening scene from the autobiography is he stood up. He was a very successful captain, very well liked by his men. This is late war. And he motioned to the men, let's move out across the field to get the Germans in the town over there. And he looked back as he got into the field, and none of them had followed him. They failed their morale check. Why? Because these were vets. They knew what the hell was going to happen to them if they got up across that field. And it was 1945. And thank you, sir. I don't plan to die in 1945 at the end of the war just to take one more goddamn little town here. So, and then the writer was brilliant. He stops the scene. You're like, what's going to happen? And he doesn't complete the scene till the end of the book. So that was very clever. But, that if you can reach people and say, that frustration for you is connecting to a real human experience. It can be powerful. A little illustration of that. After I played the fiction side, the writers did, and the photos, the historical media team does. I remember the strange thing. I looked at this black and white picture of a guy marching through the snow in the woods in 44, and I felt connected to him. And I felt connected to him. I mean, obviously, I'm not really, right? I mean, I don't know what that's like. But nonetheless, I've been through enough scenes where I had to make decisions about, do they get hot food or do we press on? And the men bitching and moaning about it, or thanking me, but then maybe we're delayed getting to the field, right? Or do I prioritize getting this hot kitchen in versus getting more shells? And I've been through enough, and the writers got really good at this. We have a famous writer, William Bernhardt, who's written books that sell 20 million copies, and he read through our fiction and advised us. And he taught us a lot of tricks, very concrete. Describe the cold, describe the feeling of the cold, describe the wet in your boots, describe the vomit in the bottom of the landing craft, and the stink of it, and how you feel. When you do that, you cross the boundary a little bit to these people in World War II. And so I looked at this photo, and I felt an emotional connection to him, even though it was a photo I would have looked at a year before and felt, oh, yeah, okay. So if you can get that emotional connection to the characters, and we worked really hard on that with a lot of tricks that we got advice about, very compelling portraits. They look like real people. Not too many leaders. So you, your squad, right? Like Baldur's Gate guys. You have 3 or 4 people you're with the whole campaign. You're with 4 or 5 leaders unless they die. Deep emotional connections. Then we can start to persuade you about things that you don't like as a min-maxer. But you get now, it's giving you a credible experience. So you have to surrender, let me sum up. You have to surrender some of your wonderful agency to be the most powerful player ever. To be in an actual, feel like you're somewhat in the real experience. And if you can embrace that, like the drunk who slammed through the door in D&D, because maybe drunk players did do that when they went berserk, then you will have a more credible, well, it's a very lousy example, a real credible fantasy example. You'll have a real credible World War II, more credible connection to what they dealt with, which was snafu.
And comment Game Board Games asks, was the game you're thinking of Into the Breach, the alien one coming down?
Thank you. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it depresses me a little bit from my background because I like doing the chaos because I think it connects to the realities. But these, people are now being trained to have perfect information in games. Oh, I know exactly what the enemy plans to do. Boy, I can tell you, company commanders in World War II would love that one.
Oh yeah. And that
They're
actually,
lucky if we knew what their troops were doing.
the question I want to ask you about in terms of onboarding, part of the challenge that I see, and this is something that I know from a lot of games that I've played, is giving the player the information they need to connect those dots. Like
Yeah,
what you just said is an example of, if we were doing like a more of a casual war game, it would be like, okay, you're going to tell the player this squad of German soldiers, they're going to move over here and they're going to shoot for 5 points of damage. What do you do?
right.
Now, the problem of obvious is that then the game just becomes about, okay, I'm
Organ.
going just to follow. It becomes very much that 1-to-1 of enemy does A, I counter with B.
Right.
The issue when it comes to onboarding is that if you don't tell the player anything, if you just throw them in, again, this I think goes really well as you've been talking about with the boot camp examples. If you just throw the player in and just tell them all these mechanics, okay,
Right.
go over here, click right, go over here, shoot this guy.
Right.
They're not going to start learning how to make those connections. And it's that connection I think has always been the death nail for a lot of abstracted design. Because again, like as I said, I don't have a background in war games and 4X style titles. You tell me to go over here and click this guy, I'm going to do it. Why am I doing it? Conversely, you give me an action game and you say, okay, this move is a knock up. This move does stun. I'm going to immediately put together in my head, okay, I want to hit the guy with the stun, do a knock up, follow with a combo, Devil May Cry, high octane excitement. But how much do you tell the player is the challenge? And something that I've been struggling with is like trying to do more onboarding videos. Like, when does it become too much? And when does it become, again, like you're just saying, click this button, walk this guy over here. You're a general now. Go do all these scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, some people don't want any instruction whatsoever.
Yep.
They just want to play around, and that's not wrong. But we know it's a disaster with 99 or 95% of people in burden because they never get thrust in their face that their assumptions don't hold, right? Like bang, 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 you're dead. And then they're just deeply frustrated with the gameplay. But, we all think we know. But we know not because we're smart. We know because we've listened hard to a lot of playtesters and we've seen what works or doesn't. But coming back to how do you onboard? It was a really interesting cycle, right? We started with simpler and less, and then the narrative helped, right? We brought in more and more of the narrative to help people see why, to have Sergeant Grant explain why, right? To have the Empire work you over, but in a way you got why you were worked over. Another little trick just for fun was, the Empire, nobody likes being told they're wrong. The Empire specializes like real Empires and sergeants do in telling you how wrong you are. But players aren't used to that. They're very used to being told how wonderful they are. So we do that. So a trick, because that's hard on people emotionally, was we have another sergeant, Sergeant Bennett. And he thought you're a good cop, right? The other guy's a bad cop. But Sergeant Bennett's always there. Oh, look, he's going to be a jerk because he's trying to keep you alive when you fight real bullets. And so that helped, right? Because we had people complaining about being critiqued. Right, and but on the other hand, we had people, immersion players, saying, "Oh my God, I really feel like I'm in boot camp." And we had, of course, vets. There's a really cool video out there. There's a guy who's an ex-Marine. I'm not ex-Marine, sorry, retired Marine, Gimpy Gamer. He's a board gamer and tactical gamer. But go watch this 30-minute video. It's really encouraging because he just starts reminiscing about boot camp. Because we connect, to what it's like. But it's not what people expect. They expect to be nicely treated and coddled. But we had to use some tricks, and the fiction helps. Like, the Sergeant Bennett, who's your buddy, and it gives you context why people are being mean to you. We're not very mean, but compared to most games, it's not normal. Another trick was the videos. One thing the videos did, besides teach the mechanics, was worked very well for people who would watch the videos was why are we doing this mechanic to you? Once we gave them like to you day, the reason we make it 4Fs and suppression fire rather than bang, 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 you're dead, because that's what we believe was true. And here's why we think that's true. Alluding to that made people buy in. Because again, why do people come to Burn Command? Because they think, oh, maybe I can do that. Company, maybe I could be like Winners and Band of Brothers. Maybe I can, it's a role-playing hope. And so if we touch on the core reason they bought the game, or someday I hope, right, or tried the demo, then they say, okay, you're kind of jerky with your morale checks, but I get why you're doing it. And so they buy in. But then, every time you teach them that, that's more time. Oh, the video went 30 seconds longer to teach that, or 20 seconds, right? I don't want any more videos. I want to go fight in Morocco, right? So it's a hard balance, this onboarding. But I would say the core onboarding lessons we've learned is everybody's different. So teach 6 ways from Sunday. Though, of course, that will upset some people because they don't want 6 ways from Sunday, but that's the only approach that works.
Yep.
Repetition. So we studied, I'm a research guy, so I studied a lot of the techniques for this. You've probably heard about this one. Another one, there's a female game psychologist teaches this. I'd have to think about her book. I can dig it up if I want. But just is teach one thing at a time, repeat it a lot, and then teach the next thing, but keep using the first one and learning the second one. So if you watch our boot camp, we do that. You practice the first one, and then you start practicing as part of doing the new second one. So we're still teaching the first one, but you think you're learning the second one. So we do this sort of, training wheels. And we take the beginning. People don't like this at the beginning sometimes, right? It's very training wheels at the start. Click here, do this, led by the nose. But if you watch each as we go through each sequence, more and more the training wheels start coming off. Then we start putting you in situations like, okay, you got your leader here. You only have so many action points. We call them orders. Are you going to go rally that guy who needs help? Are you going to go bolster here to get that fire? Are you going to move over here and get this unit assaulting? And there's no right answer. Now you're starting to face, but we're framing it for you, right? Here are your choices. And then eventually, like the fourth one is, some of the YouTubers have shown us, called Crossroads. It's a good battle. It's very open tactically. It's challenging, and it's free form. Good luck. Do what you want. And it's hands off just to let you practice all the things you've done. Of course, the full campaign's that too. So it's repetition. It's training wheels. It's motivating the player. It's hitting them from many different modalities, the diagrams, the text, the fiction, the barks. One of the most effective ones you can do is, this is probably the most effective. If they do something wrong on the game mechanics, intervene at that moment and say, oh, you didn't get that assault because this. That's hard. That takes a lot of coding for all the variations, but we do some of that, right? Which worked well when we could do it. Like, that failed because you didn't bolster. Remember, you're supposed to bolster. And putting up messages like, hey, you might want to bolster. Hey, you might want to bolster. And just repetition, very different modes, reinforcement, that's not repeating, narrative to explain, and then appeal to the immersion to motivate. So, and then of course, all the classic stuff like let them be successful, right? Feel good for overcoming that situation. And then people learn because they overcame something, right? So they learn from failure. That's a primary way you learn, actually. But then they reinforce from success. So, but again, like tricky, sneaky things that we get some pushback on, like, oh, you run right across the field, the umpire's going to ding you then when you didn't waypoint to go through the terrain. You got corrected. You got schooled. But they don't forget. And then you see them playing and respect. And when they're in Crossroads, they don't run across the open. And then they're happy with themselves because they start to do well. So it's hard, though, and I think you put your finger on the core problem. The more you do all these many different things, the more you run the risk of information overload. Why is this boot camp so long? Why do you have these videos you put in? Like, one thing I struggle with is I go back and forth on this one. This is hard. Or how much do you legislate with the player as opposed to give them free reign? Like, here's a nasty one, and I think about this almost every day. Like, you can escape the video. You hit the escape key, you can skip the videos. I keep saying here, should I give the player agency and tell them they can do that? But I don't. I do want to tell them eventually when they're playing second time, but I don't right now. And some people are like, well, what the hell, man? Let me make my own decision. And I'm very sympathetic to that because players should have agency. On the other hand, I know from tons of live playtests, if I encourage people to skip the videos, they will go out there, they will be confused and frustrated, and they'll say the game sucks. And I can tell you, they'll come back and say it sucks in a much more unpleasant way than they will like, why'd you make me watch the videos? I, in the end, make a slightly fascist decision to not point out they could skip it. And some people don't like that. I understand that. I get why they don't like it. But I'm actually trying, based on what we've been beaten into our heads from playtesters, to do the right thing by them, even though they don't like it. Now, the best analogy I can come up with is stoplights. Stoplights are an inconvenience. They stop your forward motion. They should be optional. If I don't want to go through the wait for stoplight, I should go. No. There are nimble people out there who are great drivers, right? In their wonderful car. And they will get through the intersection. And honestly, probably you could do most of the day without the stoplight there and get away with it. But we all know why there are stoplights there. Because in actually being a jerk and telling people they don't get a choice, they have to stop, is in their self-interest mostly. Even the guys who are brilliant drivers are going to have a bad day, right? So damned if you do, damned if you don't. But sometimes you have to be a jerk and insist on some things because it's in their self-interest, but they don't want to hear it.
Yep.
And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was the wrong decision. But my responsibility is to listen as hard as I can to the playtesting, all the different groups of people we have, and try to internalize into the game design what they've told me is true and what I've seen to be true, rather than be nice. I'll put it last way. I could be nice and say, skip the videos. Oh, and don't follow these steps. But it's not actually, it's cruel to be kind, right? But if I respect the player, I have to be a little not nice sometimes. I think maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not doing it because I want to be mean.
Yeah, and again, it's that challenge of getting the information across to the person. You mentioned like the idea of repetition, and that was one of the more interesting aspects when we talk about like action-based design. That some of the best tutorials for action games are very organic. You're not stopping the player to go, okay, press A to jump, or this is a pit, you're going to fall and it's going to hurt you. You're kind of like drawing the player, as you said, removing the training wheels. Or for a lot of action games, removing that safety net of, okay, this jump is completely safe. Now it'll inconvenience you. Now if you fall in, it's a giant buzzsaw of death, and you'll die instantly. And the game never stops to tell the player that. And the point about explaining the why, that's something that I've said so many times now, that like a good tutorial for me has to explain, what am I doing, how do I do it, why do I do it? And it's
we got late to why, but I agree. And when we did that helped a lot. And there's one last thing I reminded by something you said, which is teach by analogy and concrete analogy, like the stoplight I just tried to use, right? So the writers are very helpful there, but finding the right analogies for communicating is very important. So sometimes playtesters suggested, I think one of the playtesters suggested eventually, chess as a metaphor for you get a move, the enemy gets a move. You get a move, the enemy gets room. In Bird and Command, one of your leaders gets to do things, but not all. Then the enemy gets a leader to do things. Then another of your leaders. It's chess-like, right? In the sense of not like it's chess, like you make the exact mathematical decision, you win. Chess in the sense of alternating tight turns, right? Chess is not move all my pieces, and you move all your pieces. So we're like chess, and that metaphor helped. We actually put a picture of World War II guys playing chess, and we use it as a metaphor, and it helped people. So finding analogies and metaphors is very good. Very concrete examples, diagrams, working them over for visual clarity. There's the details of communication is vital too. And then Alan, for example, who did the writing and the tutorials, he put obsessive hours and endless feedbacks and improvements of sentences and word choices and so forth to get it across. Why were you confused there? What were you thinking that meant? And so forth. Of course, it's impossible in the sense that for one player, this is the right sentence, but for another player with a different background, this is the right sentence. But, we try to hit the statistical in most cases, and then we hit it several different ways. The diagram says it one way, the writing says it another way, the on-field bark says it another way, and maybe one of those will get across. I just want to repeat, though. I mean, it's not like this incredibly hard set of 600 mechanics. It's mostly that these mechanics are different than their X.
Yep.
I mean, really, the mechanics boil down to you get action points called orders. You spend them through your leaders and your units, and you do actions. And then the actions, you just make sure and then there's this command and control. That's kind of it, really. But you have to do them in unusual ways, like the 4Fs.
Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is the challenge right there. Something that I've said a lot about when I'm critiquing games, that there's that difference between depth and complexity. That you can have a game that has, 500 different key presses that you have to figure out. Is that really a deep game, or is it just a very convoluted one? Whereas you can have a game that's, let's say it's only like 4 or 5 commands, but you have to figure out exactly how those work within the field. If you look at what was it? Something like Frozen Synapse from like last decade, which was that was like a WeGo style game where everyone goes at the same time. Your command wise, you're not given a lot of orders in that game, but understanding, okay, I have to take my guy and turn him this way and have him walk up there. That is a lot harder to do, and it's why I think a lot more people have gravitated, as we've been saying, in terms of like how player feedback and player condition has changed, to games that make it very easy to kind of like, you get that immediate like perfect vision. If we go back to something like the Batman games, like having detective vision, that you can just hit that button, you have complete X-ray vision. Go here, this guy's over there, he's looking over this way. But
we have Total Fog of War, right? Yeah. Which actually made the gaming people really. I mean, it's very enjoyable, but it's nasty chaos surprises. You didn't expect the Germans, or over time you started to learn where they are. Let me close on one last thing because you brought it up. So, when I was learning, I'm a learning game designer. I've been iterating a lot. I was not, I'd done a board game before this, and I've done some things over my life, but I'm not a vet. I was green, really. But I studied hard and listened hard. One of the things, Sid Meier said, games are a series of interesting decisions.
Yep.
So I thought hard about what the hell does that mean? I believe what that means is there are certain categories of interesting decision in game mechanics. And one of them is limited resources. For us as animals, it's very interesting to us if, quick digression, that's kind of cool, because I'm always coming from animal studies and psychology background. You take a dog, you put in front of it a bowl of water, bowl of food. It just jumps back and forth. It's managing its resource. What's the resource of managing how much effort it has to do? Just, I'll bite, I'll drink. Now, start moving apart the food and the water. The dog becomes like a trained economist. Oh, they're 100 yards away. I will sit here and drink my fill for 5 minutes, and then I will go eat the food for 5 to 10 minutes, because it's managing its limited resource, the energy to do that. We're just, as animals, it's just built into our bodies to never waste calories, because you might die if you waste calories. So in games, if you put in front of Josh, I'm giving you 3 action points, and you want to rally, and you want to assault, and you want to bolster, and you also want to move him back, and you want to press him to, you're like, oh, Jesus, which one do I do? So my nasty bastard game design principle was never give them enough resources for all the things that I like. Never. So we had like one guy on the Steam forum said, hey, why don't I get to opt fire? Why did I have to save an order, an action point to opt to, what's the XCOM term? Not opportunity fire. Reaction fire. Why do I have to spend a action point to reaction fire? And I said, well, it's this principle, right? One of my design principles: never give you anything free. You want to do something interesting, you must pay, because then it becomes interesting. Oh, you'd like your unit to move up and then have an action left point so it can fire an enemy? You got to save it, right? Oh, but if I save it, I won't get as far as I need to, and I want it to flank. Do I dare risk flanking so I'm in a great position next turn because the game turns are running out? But then I'll have no action points, orders to respond for. What do I do? That's an interesting decision, right? Yeah. So limited resources, nothing free, which means kind of a jerk principle, but it makes people engaged. And then design principles for the writers was typically no more than 3 choices, because then people get overwhelmed. And no choice should be obviously right. So, you'd like to have a recon flight over the battlefield so you know where the enemy is. That's a good decision. But sorry, if you go organize that and get that going, you won't have administrative time with the higher ups to get the artillery support you need to politic to get, right? Because they don't have enough artillery. Oh, but you really want to do is rest the men and get their morale up before this fight. So what are you going to do, Commander? Are you going to get the artillery? Are you going to do the recon? Or are you going to boost them up? And statistically, the playtesting, we would just sit there. Oh, nobody picks decision 3. We'll make it harder, right? So we've spent a lot of time trying to always make you sort of slightly curse at the screen like, God damn it, I want all those decisions. But I can only have one.
And about choice paralysis, that's another interesting point about this. You give the player 27 different things they can do, there's going to be sitting there going, I don't know what I'm looking at. Okay, do I want to do these? Do I want to do that? It was one of the things that kind of killed me about the original XCOM, when you got to the point where you can have 30 troops on the field. Great, so now instead of battles taking 20 minutes, I got to spend an additional 40 minutes moving 15 additional guys. Where I always found more interesting, okay, you can only have 5 people. How do you make this work? And it is, again, very interesting to go along those lines. And something that I forgot to mention earlier about when you're talking about having kind of control chaos or letting the player not have complete control. It reminds you a lot of when I spoke with Emmett McMillan, who did The Binding of Isaac, and about how the item spread works in that game. You can get some really amazing items, you can get some horrible items that can completely sink your build. How do you roll with that? And again, there are people who love that kind of stuff. I'm one of those. And you have people who will hate that. Who, if you tell them, okay, you want to do this, but now you just lost this choice, they're going to see, again, as you were saying about, it's that idea of betrayal. You tell me to go from here to here, but this is an open field, you're dead, yep. But you didn't mention that. What the hell, game?
Yep. Well, in the end, look, I feel like I remember reading some designer who said you got to have some courage in your design conviction. So in the end, I feel it's a good principle. So rather than just give everybody an option, you can turn that off, you can turn it on, you can make morale checks guaranteed. I think that'd probably be good if we do a story mode. But leaving that aside, I just feel like at some point, Bird Command commits to a certain vision of what we're trying to deliver, which is, we hope, an emotionally, historically and tactically credible experience of leadership and tactical leadership in World War II on and off the battlefield. And that's not going to please everybody, but it's a clear vision, we like to think, men versus mission, etc. And, that requires not doing things always the way people want. But then if you buy into why it's doing that, maybe you get something that's unusual.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there we go.
All right. So, to wrap things up, we have a few questions from chat that came in, and then I just have a few kind of wrap-up questions about kind of where Burn Command is going, and then we'll say goodnight. So, first question from John asks, what are your opinions on the current state of AAA, and have you seen attention shifting more towards indies?
It's a good question. I don't play a lot of AAAs. I think I think there is some shift. Well, I don't know the business thing. I bet Josh knows better the actual statistics. But I think things like, here's what I can say. My background was sort of business consulting and so forth for Accenture, so I can say something as a geek consultant for a moment. When the technology shifted so that the means of production, publishing, was distributed, right? People could grab the Unity engine or whatever and produce any design they wanted to in some weird angle. When the distribution mechanism of publication was no longer CDs for stores, we open up a tremendous opportunity for indies to experiment. And so I think overall, yes, there's been some shift in that indies can take risks. We're taking risks. We're doing things. AAA studios could not take the risk. Okay, let me put it differently. It's a pretty suicidal studio head who would risk taking burden and command approach for AAA, right? You really want to roll the dice that much? Really, with your franchise that's been delivering tens of millions? I mean, I'd fire the guy probably from a business standpoint. So larger scale businesses cannot take these risks because they have such shareholder responsibility. Are they evil, bad people? They won't take risks. They're coherent, rational business people running a business, and they better do that. Plus, people will be pissed if they do things too differently. But the indies are here to take risks, and we flame out a lot, but sometimes we succeed, and that adds something to the conversation. On the other hand, I'd say, back to the question, the interesting problem now is the tools are so wonderful for innovation, for experimentation, that we have another problem. We were up against 3,000 demos in the Next Fest. God, that's brutal because so many people can experiment, right? Yep. So it's lovely, but it's also hard. The problem for indies now versus AAA is to be heard. AAA's get heard. Very hard for us to get. We're lucky. We did something fresh and we had a distinctive enough hook, and we started enough years ago that it was less competition that we got heard. But I feel sorry for people taking risks. Now, this comes back to, we had lots of conversations about, all the consequences we pay for doing something very different. But the good news, because we did something different, is we got attention. There's a guy who did Crypt of the Neuro Dancers, or I got the title slightly, it's something like that.
The Necrodancer?
Yeah, he wrote a wonderful thing for indie developers about how to get your hook, to get attention. And so if I had to make decisions, I'd be a safe indie doing things the way people are familiar with. I wouldn't do that as an indie now with a competition. I'd still take the risk and do something odd, because you're going to have to get very lucky to get noticed to do things conventionally now, because everybody else is doing things fairly conventionally. So last thing I'll say is, since I pay attention a lot to the cardboard design, I pay a lot of attention to board game designs, not just board war games, all kinds of board games, because their costs to take risks are low. They're still expensive to do a board game, but I've done a board game. The labor involved in capital compared to digital is ridiculously different. And therefore, they can take crazy risks and try really new board game mechanics. So I look to board games to take even more risks than digital indie game players do. I did a little talk on this on YouTube for the Georgetown Wargaming Society, saying what you could learn from board games if you care. But that's another angle. So there's AAA, there's digital indie, and then there's board game indie. And again, I'm talking about people doing, board role-playing games. And a lot of the cool mechanics you see in new digital ones are often drawn quite consciously from board games. Like the guy who did the 4X, he did the Civ game series, and then he did a very successful, Old World. Yes. He's very consciously the designer for that. Pays a lot of attention to board games too. Okay, next question. Hopefully I give an interesting angle.
And again, I could talk about, but we'll be here for another hour easily.
Yeah, that's our whole big topic.
Let's see. Swami asked before that, what was the reason for releasing a demo before launch?
That's a good question. Originally, I didn't want to release a demo. This is a really interesting topic, actually, because we're a linear game in a sense that it's a series, like a classic role-playing game, right? In most fantasy role-playing games, you go through a series of situations and you progress and you get to the end of the adventure. Let's just leave Baldur's off the table as somebody we all have to hate for doing it so perfectly with so many people. But, we're linear in that sense. But therefore, it's very dangerous for us to reveal too much of the game too early, because then, I'd put a metaphor, then people consume the meal. We were warned about. I read a lot of stuff on demos. One of the dangers with the demos, you do a great demo, give them a full experience. They say, "Oh, wow, that was a Bird and Command experience. Wow, I really like that." And they never buy the game because they had the meal. And, that's nice, but we'll be out of business. So what the advice, from what I've read from some of the game, marketeers, etc., is be sort of a jerk like the old serials. Leave them with cliffhangers. So in the demo, we decided to do a demo, but we consciously and deliberately do cliffhangers. So you get to crossroads in the boot camp, and something, surprising happens, and it ends. And you're like, I wanted to know what happened. And you're slightly irritated, right? Like, hey, that's not fair. It's conscious. And we do the same with the two, we have two little 30 minutes for streamers. They end right when it's getting interesting, right? Well, hopefully it's been interesting before that, but right when something really critical, like one of them, I don't want to spoil it, but something interesting happens at the end, and then right there when you want to know, it stops. Conscious, because we don't want to give complete meals. So we decided to do a demo because our marketing lead said it's an important beat. It gets exposure for the game, but it was a risk. I was nervous about it for the reasons just brought up. I didn't want to give too much a meal. Also, we sit here sometimes, we talk about it in our meetings, say, how insane will we do that? Because 3/4 of let's be honest, 3/4 is tutorial. Boy, I want to go play an extended tutorial. How many people say that? Right? So it's semi-suicidal, arguably. But luckily, it worked out pretty well. People really did like it. The fact we have the narrative in, and you're immersed in being a boot camp, like the first episode of Band of Brothers, gets people, right? They get into feeling there, the historical pictures, the notes around, and they start to think, wow, this is really trying hard to connect to the reality. They see that, right? Like there's a wonderful picture in the demo. These poor bastards in training are firing a log because there weren't enough machine guns for the small U.S. Army when they were going to war. So they were firing logs, right? Bang, 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 you're dead. So people are like, whoa, look at that picture. So the demo was a success for us. And we know a success not only because top 10% by various measures like gaining followers and wish lists, but also, people played the tutorial and yet we still got wish lists. We did get people wish listing, but I think that's good, right? It's not the game for them. That's good. The demo to me is the other reason to answer your question. I'd like the demo to not drive away. I'd like the demo to let people know that this is not their kind of game, like a casual game. This is not their game. Let them know without any money involved, because they'll be a lot more pissy if money's involved. They discover it's not their game. So it's not their game. Good, because we don't want you to play a game that's not right for you, and we also don't really want your negative reviews. So the demo, I think, was a win. It also was. This is interesting. I'm glad you asked this question. I did not see this stupidly. The demo was basically early access for us. Duh. In retrospect, meaning we had a lot of downloads, relatively speaking, not like a major hit, but significant thousands and thousands of downloads. And that was a great bug test. I thought the bugs were in pretty good shape. It uncovered bugs that you don't see until thousands and thousands of people play your game. Also, it surfaced repetitive messaging. What are people upset about? Like the assault. What are the pain points? That we kind of knew, but what you want to see as a game designer is statistical patterns. Not Frank over here, who really thinks you must have a game manual. That's true for Frank, not for most people. But when everybody's saying, want a game manual, okay, we take it more seriously, right?
Yep.
Or a needs percentage. So it was extremely useful in finding bugs and for surfacing problems. Like one other irritant for people was, we don't allow certain screen resolution, 1366 by 768, which is a decent little percentage laptops have. But when I was starting the game design, that ratio was not common. So I designed for a ratio that was true some years ago. And so people were irritated. And then they have to change their Windows scaling. And so we got a fair amount of complaints, understandable. So that's what I've been dull work for the last 2 weeks. I've been getting that in place, so we'll scale all the different things, and hopefully be on the Steam Deck. But the demo is great for surfacing that too. So it was great to do it, but it's very tricky for business and other things. But yes, it was the right thing to do in hindsight.
I was about to ask you that question about the Windows scaling, because I know that was a few of the complaints on the forum as well.
Yeah, and that's fair.
And again, like, it's also, again, why having demos, teasers, and stuff like this are really great. Because as you were saying earlier about how snafu can happen, no game survives first contact with the consumers.
Thank you. I'm going to use that line again. That's a great line. That is so true. And I will say the playtesting experience, oh my God, was so humbling. I'd come in from studying human-centered design, fancy term for trying to do good interface. I thought I could do it. Oh my God, so humbling. But we did tons of formal surveys with people. We did live playtests. We did weekly meetings with groups of 12 different squads of all types for going through whole campaigns. We did huge amounts. And so we got there. We overcame my constant stupidity by enough people telling me how stupid it was in a statistically consistent way to help me get it more right.
Yep.
Okay, other questions?
All right. Game Board Games ask, how do you feel about the balancing of randomness and when to use random elements?
Yeah, well, this comes back every time you introduce random, you're asking for hate.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, the XCOM example, shooting earlier, the morale checks. Um, I thought consciously about where will the chaos be in the game design because war is chaos, and if you're going to do a credible experience, there better be chaos. And so I made a lot of decisions about what are the most important chaos. One of the most important is fog of war. I mean, core in a battlefield, you just don't know what the F word is going on the battlefield. You just don't. You don't know where your guys are even. You don't know how they're doing. You know what's happening to third platoon. If we're going to be more realistic, like you should lose orders and you should not even get good reports on what's going on. But we limited it, right? People need to have control. So, but fog of war and enemy, central design, knowing how we weren't going to do that. Just core. And it's exciting because it's surprises. Oh my God, like XCOM, there's a monster over there, right? Crap! So, that was a core chaos in the sense of you don't know what's happening. The narrative engine was another core chaos engine because the writers can do whatever the hell they want. If there are any board gamers around here, there's a wonderful board game called Ambush. You never knew what was going to happen when it was like sort of World War II TV board game. You moved into Hex, you never knew what was going to happen. And so we can do that kind of stuff, right? So that was important for the narrative chaos and just making the world come alive in ways that strict mechanics can't. And then the morale checks, core, right? Asking people to deal with death on the battlefield and take mortal risks, central to the battlefield psychology experience. Whereas most games emphasize firepower, which is very important. But if you're talking about people on the battlefield, the psychology is critical, whether they'll do it. Why the Vichy's not fight well? Was it because they didn't have enough machine guns? That was not the core problem. They didn't want to fight, right? Yep. The Italians by late war did not want to fight. So Germans did. So they fight well because they want to. So but we gave up lots of other forms of chaos. Like example, I would love to from a simulation standpoint. Orders getting lost, confused. There are some games that have taken that. That's a hard one. But what I'd like to go with Burden would be a procedural one, like a roguelike Burden of Command someday, where, it's generated maps and force pools and narrative, like a Wilder Myth has shown can be done. And in that context, I would like to put a lot more chaos in. Like leader death. We massively underestimate how often your leaders will die compared to the reality for junior officers because we want you to bond with your men and your leaders. Because we're just killing them all the time at a realistic rate. You'll never bond with them and you won't feel the burden of command. Whereas in a real war, you would have a lot of meals and downtime and, bunking up together. And so you would have gotten to know them. So we cheat on that. That's a form of chaos we should have done more. Casualties of leaders. But I, in the end, to reach a larger audience, I did a lot less chaos than what I'd like to do, even for games I like. There's some wonderful board games out there that just do chaos out the wazoo. There's one called Combat Commander that drives people nuts with this chaos. What cards do you draw? Will they even follow your order? Well, you get the cards you need, but it's a fantastic experience if you're open to it. Another fun one would have been, hey, maybe you get 2 leader rounds in a row, or maybe you get skipped and the Germans get a double move. That'd be cool, but it pissed people off. It'd be really interesting. So the procedural game, people will forgive that more because, hey, they can always restart and they get it's like random crap's going to happen to me and that's cool.
All right. And, excuse me, one more question from Swami came in. I don't know how serious this one is, but they asked, was removing mandatory military services a mistake? I don't know if you have any thoughts. Removing mandatory military service is a mistake. I asked them, is this in the game or in real life? And they did not respond.
You mean in the real world? Well, I have an opinion on that. I don't care. My opinion is I wish there were mandatory service writ large. I didn't say military only. I think, civilian corps, like one of my sons actually did California Conservation Corps, which is like the old stuff they did in the Depression. Fantastic experience. My wife's a vet. One of my sons is a vet. My father was a vet. So I think, and dealing with the people who've done service is fantastic. The vets, they're so self-sacrificing. So what are you doing this weekend, vet? After doing all this free stuff for us, I'm going out and helping the community yet one more way. I believe there would be less division in the country, like World War II brought for us, if we spent more time together across our classes and regions and neighborhoods through some form of service. So, yeah, I think if he's done, I wish that everybody came out of high school and had a year of some form of service, whatever it is they want to do, military or conservation corps or Peace Corps or whatever the hell. Right, I think that would be good for the country. That is my personal opinion as a citizen. I'd be happy to be told I'm wrong as long as we could have a civil discussion around it, because that's what I think we should do. I like the fact that some of the European societies still insist on that. I think it helps them, like Switzerland. And how could it not, right? People don't like being told what to do, but they spend time together. Now that person over there from the back country of Switzerland's not a bastard because I know what he's like because he was one of my friends. Surely it would help us. So yeah, that's just my opinion.
All right. All right, that is the last question that came in. So we're 2 hours and 20 minutes in, so I think we can certainly wrap things up. So my very fast kind of rapid fire questions for you, Luke, in terms of Burn a Command. So again, we're recording this just at the beginning of November. Oh, do you have any estimated dates or plans for when Burn a Command will be released?
Q1 2025.
Okay.
It will be released unless God comes down and curses me. I mean, we could release right now, kind of, but we have the full campaign. It's all been play tested through. But there are a lot of things we want to do from the feedback. But yeah, it will be Q1 2025.
Okay. And obviously it's going to be on Steam. Are you playing it for any other platforms?
Well, Steam Deck we're hoping to make happen. It's just for a little indie. We use Python, which is one of the reasons development's been a long time. Because I basically built my own Unity like a moron. Has some advantages now, but oh my god. So that means tricky for us to go to other platforms. So I think probably realistically not, honestly. Localization, our question along those lines. We have 2 novels worth of interactive fiction. You don't read all that, but so we can give you a lot of variation. And there's a lot of text. Don't buy this game if you don't want to read. Yep. But the writing's gotten universally good response generally. That is a lot of localization, not cheap. So we'll do that if the sales are good. We'll localize to other countries, but it will be very businessy, boring decisions along those lines. Like, okay, it's going to cost this much money. Do we think we'll recoup it?
Yep. Oh yes. And let me see anything else. Please. I think that is about. I'm sure I'm blanking on a question because I'm also starting to feel it after 2 hours of chatting.
Well, only thing I want to say is if people want to encourage indies like that question, you want to help indies. 3,000 demos in Steam Next Fest. I don't know what it is this year, 20 or 30,000. Spread the word. Not that we've got the answer. We're a brilliant game. We've done it all right. Of course, we're doing many things wrong. Of course, but we're trying hard. We are doing. I think it's fair. We're doing something different. It's pretty clear for people, either good or bad, that we're doing something different. And so, if you want indies to take risks, and you think this is an interesting risk to take, support it. Like we had one of our streamers told me, he said, I'm not sure this is a game for me, but I really believe in what you're trying to do, and so I'm going to promote it, even if it's not strictly a match for me. I'm not 100% sure it's for my audience, but I really want to support what you're doing. So you want to help us spread the word, encourage, I would sum it up this way. Encourage people to think of Burden Command as not the answer on World War II human combat. It's not. But it is trying to open up a door that seems to be fresh on how to deal with tactical combat. And what that experience is like. And so if you want to see more of this, other campaigns, improvement in the engine, more chaos, if you like that, etc., procedural Burden Command, and hopefully inspire others to do it even better. I'd be thrilled for modders and others to do it better eventually. Then help us and be forgiving while we make lots of mistakes, because we're not doing it the safe way.
All right. I think that's also a really good point to end our conversation on. So, I guess final question for you, Luke, is anything social media wise for people listening live recorded so they can follow Burn Command or anything else?
Thank you. We have a Twitter account. I run that personally. I'm always happy to chat with people. Follow us on Steam. Wishlist us. That helps us with Steam algorithm. We have a YouTube channel that we post on pretty regularly. And we have, and our Facebook's still going. And Jesus, there's so many damn places now.
Yep.
and we're not doing a lot on Reddit, but I would say, and we have a newsletter. Sign up for a newsletter for the big ones. But come by Twitter. It's fun to it's fun to chat with people there. So.
All right. Well, I think we can certainly end things here. But yeah, Luke, again, thank you so much for reaching out. And yeah, this was a great conversation.
And I learned things from you too. You know, you have so much experience talking to other game developers. Things you reference helps me in my framing. I'm going to go offline and watch this later. And that wonderful line you did about like 15 minutes ago, I've got to remember to steal from you.
The one about snafu or no game survives first contact.
That's it. I love that.
I want credit though. If you do steal, I want you to make sure to give me the credit for that one.
Maybe if I get paid, we'll see. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, audience, for the good questions.
Yep. Not a problem. So, Luke, if you want to hang on just for a few seconds after the stream, but again, I definitely wish you the best of luck with Burden, and yeah, if you're free in the future, I'm sure we can find certainly a lot more topics to chat about.
Yeah, no, it was great. A pleasure for the opportunity again, and you know, it really is a pleasure talking to you because you have such depth in this area now, and you've thought so many years and talked to so many people. So it's talking to our game designer, except somebody who sort of has a broader mindset.
Yep, thank you. So, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're enjoying this live or recorded, be sure to do all the YouTubing stuff. We have our Discord, we have our Patreon. If you want to buy all my books on design, be sure to check them out as well. And again, if you are a developer working on a game or want to talk about any aspect of game dev, I'm always looking for guests for this series. So reach out to me any which way. So, again, thank you to the audience who's been enjoying this live. Thank you to everyone watching this recorded, if you leave any great comments. And last but not least, thank you, Luke, for coming on, and I hope we can chat again in the future.
All right.
All right. So that's everyone. Come back for discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you examine the art and science of games. Until our next chat, have a great evening.